What's up, guys? Welcome to No Harry. We've got something special today. What if Dobby's magic detected 45 illegal bindings on Harry at age 6 and started Elf Revolution War? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, 45. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like dust and old shoes and the particular staleness of air that hadn't moved properly in years. Harry Potter had long since stopped noticing. When you slept somewhere every night, you stopped smelling it the same way you stopped hearing the refrigerator hum or the pipe settling. It just became the texture of the world, unremarkable and permanent as stone. He was 6 years old, and he had never once questioned whether sleeping in a cupboard was normal. Aunt Petunia had told him it was what boys like him deserved, and since Harry had no reference point for what boys like him were supposed to deserve, he'd taken her word for it. He was small for his age, which the Dursleys took as confirmation of something, though they never said exactly what. His hair grew in every direction regardless of how many times Aunt Petunia attacked it with scissors and something that smelled like vinegar. His glasses were Dudley's old ones, slightly too big, held together at the bridge with a strip of electrical tape. He had learned to hold his head at a specific angle to stop them sliding off his nose, and he did this without thinking now, the same way he'd learned to be quiet when Uncle Vernon was watching the news, and to eat quickly when Dudley wasn't looking, and to flinch at the sound of a belt buckle even when there was no particular reason to flinch. These were all things Harry had learned because they kept the days smoother. He was, even at 6, a very quick study. It was a Tuesday in July, which meant nothing in particular except that it was school holidays and Dudley was at some friend's house doing whatever Dudley did when there were other large boys to do it with. Aunt Petunia had given Harry a list of tasks that would have been ambitious for a professional cleaner and told him dinner needed to be started by 5. Harry was currently on his hands and knees behind the downstairs toilet with a scrubbing brush, which was not his favorite way to spend a Tuesday but was considerably better than some alternatives he could name. He was thinking about nothing, the way he'd gotten good at, when something popped in the hallway. Not a loud pop. Not the kind of sound that would bring Aunt Petunia thundering out of the kitchen. A small pop, like someone snapping their fingers right next to your ear, there and gone, almost more of a feeling than a sound. Harry went still. He peered around the bathroom door and saw the oddest thing he had ever seen, which was saying something because Harry had seen quite a few odd things. Most of them had been things he'd accidentally caused and had learned to pretend he hadn't. This, however, was definitely not his doing. Standing in the hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, was a creature roughly 2.5 feet tall. It had enormous green eyes the size of tennis balls, skin the color of old parchment, ears like satellite dishes that swiveled independently of each other, and was wearing what appeared to be a filthy pillowcase belted with a piece of rope. It was looking at Harry with an expression that Harry, after a moment's confused study, identified as absolute horror. Not frightened of Harry horror. The other kind. The kind you got on your face when you saw something terrible happening to someone else. Harry stared at it. It stared at him. "Hello," Harry said, because he had nothing else. The creature made a sound like a small, pained intake of breath. Its enormous eyes had gone wet at the edges. It was looking at him, no, Harry realized, not quite at him. Around him. The way someone might look at a person and see the cage they were standing in rather than the person themselves. "You is Harry Potter," the creature whispered. It had a high, reedy voice, and it spoke each word with the careful weight of someone handling something fragile. "Yeah," Harry said. He came all the way out from behind the bathroom door, scrubbing brush still in hand, and stood in the hallway. Up close, the creature looked even more distressed. Its fingers were twisting together in a complicated knot. Dobby is come on an errand," it said, and then seemed to remember something and looked briefly furious with itself. "But Dobby is not going to do the errand. Dobby has decided." "Okay," Harry said. He considered the creature for a moment. It didn't seem dangerous. It seemed, if anything, like it might cry, and Harry had strong instincts about what to do around people who might cry, mostly developed from years of being in the general vicinity of Dudley's tactical tears, but those instincts told him this was different. Do you want to sit down? There's a chair in the kitchen. The creature, Dobby, blinked at him. Something flickered in those enormous eyes. Harry Potter is offering Dobby a chair. Only if you want one. You don't have to. Dobby looked like Harry had just said something in a language Dobby had theoretically been told existed but had never actually heard spoken aloud. He stared for another moment. Then he said, very quietly, yes. Dobby thinks Dobby would like that. They went to the kitchen. Harry pulled out one of the chairs and Dobby climbed up onto it and sat, feet dangling well above the floor. Harry pulled out the chair across from him and sat too, setting the scrubbing brush on the table. Aunt Petunia would be furious about that later, but Aunt Petunia wasn't here now. You're called Dobby, Harry said. What are you? Dobby is a house elf. He said it with a particular flatness, the way you said things that were simply facts and not worth inflecting. Dobby serves the Malfoy family. Harry didn't know who the Malfoy family was, so he filed it away and moved on. And they sent you here? To do an errand? Yes. Dobby's enormous hands twisted together again. Dobby's master wished to know certain things. About Harry Potter. About whether Harry Potter was a threat. He seemed to be choosing each word with surgical precision. But when Dobby arrived and Dobby looked at Harry Potter, Dobby could not do the errand. Because, he stopped. Harry waited. Dobby took a breath that seemed too large for his small chest. Can Dobby ask Harry Potter something? Sure. Does Harry Potter know, Dobby said slowly, what he truly is? Harry tilted his head. What do you mean? What Harry Potter can do. What Harry Potter is, underneath. Dobby's eyes were very serious. Does Harry Potter know about magic? Something went very quiet inside Harry's chest. It wasn't surprise, exactly. It was more like hearing a word for something he'd always known existed but had never been able to name. He looked at Dobby for a long moment. Then he said, things happen sometimes. Around me. I don't mean for them to. Yes, Dobby said, and his voice was suddenly rough with something raw. Harry Potter does not mean for them to, because Harry Potter does not know he is doing them, because there are things on Harry Potter, things done to Harry Potter, that are stopping him from knowing. Harry frowned. Things on me? Dobby hesitated. Then he said, can Dobby show Harry Potter? It will not hurt. Dobby promises. Harry thought about this. He thought about it the way he thought about most decisions, quickly, practically, based on available evidence. The creature in front of him had appeared in his hallway, had sat in the offered chair, had asked permission before doing anything. Harry had reasonable instincts about people, even non-people, and those instincts were saying that Dobby was, in some fundamental way, telling the truth. Okay, he said. Show me. Dobby raised one small hand and did something. Harry couldn't have described it. It was less a gesture than a reaching, like a hand passing through water to find what was underneath. The air in front of Harry shimmered faintly, the way heat rises from summer pavement, and then Dobby went absolutely pale. His hand dropped. He sat very still, staring at Harry with an expression that had moved beyond distress into something much colder and more focused. How many? Harry asked, because Dobby was clearly counting something and Harry had always been good at reading rooms. 45, Dobby said. The word sat between them on the kitchen table like something heavy being set down. 45 what? Binding spells. Dobby's voice had gone very controlled in the particular way that meant there was something underneath it being held with considerable effort. Magical binding spells, placed on Harry Potter's core, on the deepest part of what Harry Potter is, starting from when Harry Potter was very small. Some is old. Some is fresh. They is layered on each other like chains. His jaw tightened. Harry Potter should be, the magic inside Harry Potter should be like a fire. What Dobby is seeing instead is a fire with 45 locks around it. Harry looked down at his hands. They looked the same as they always did. Thin, slightly scraped from the garden work, nails that Aunt Petunia never let him cut himself because she didn't trust him with scissors. He turned them over, palms up. Nothing there that he could see. "Who put them there?" he asked. Dobby opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "Some of them," he said carefully, "Dobby does not know. Some of them is very dark magic, very old. Some of them," he paused for so long that Harry looked up from his hands. Dobby was staring at the table. "Some of them is Dumbledore's work." The name meant nothing to Harry. "And some," Dobby said, even more carefully, "is from this house." Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked around the kitchen, the neat surfaces, the row of Dudley's drawings held up by Aunt Petunia's decorative magnets, the smell of bleach that was always present no matter how clean everything already was. The normality of it all, the determined, aggressive normality. "My aunt and uncle," Harry said. It wasn't quite a question. "There is magic here that is not natural magic. There is, Dobby must be honest, there is something on this house and on Harry Potter that is meant to look like protection and is not only protection. Protection from outside, yes. But also, Dobby seemed to be searching for a word that would be accurate without being cruel, and then seemed to decide that accuracy mattered more. Also keeping Harry Potter small." Harry nodded once. He looked back down at his hands. Something had shifted in his face, not anger, exactly. Something more like the expression you got when you finally understood the rules of a game you'd been losing without knowing you were playing it. "Can you take them off?" he asked. Dobby looked at him. The enormous eyes were calculating now, intelligent in a way that Harry suspected most people never noticed because they weren't looking for it. "Dobby can try. Dobby is, house elf magic is old magic. Older than what humans do. Some of these bindings, a wizard would take months to remove. For Dobby." He turned his head slightly, like a bird listening for something. "The dark ones will be hard. The ones from this house will be easier. The ones from the old man," a flicker of something that looked very much like disdain crossed Dobby's face, gone so quickly Harry almost missed it. "Those will need to be done carefully, because they is tangled with other things." "What other things?" "A curse," Dobby said. "Somebody tried to kill Harry Potter once. When Harry Potter was very small. The curse, it bounced. But it left a mark, and the mark left complications, and somebody decided that the best way to handle the complications was to," he made a gesture with both hands, a pressing down motion. "Was to press the whole thing flat and hope nobody looked too closely." Harry processed this. "Someone tried to kill me," he said, in the same tone one might say, "so it's going to rain tomorrow." "Yes. And the response was to put 45 bindings on me." 45 that Dobby can detect," Dobby said. "There may be more that is subtler." "Right." Harry looked up at Dobby. The afternoon light was coming through the kitchen window and it caught the dust in the air and made everything seem very ordinary and very still. "Dobby," he said, "why are you telling me this? You said you were sent to spy on me. Why are you helping me instead?" Dobby was quiet for a long moment. His enormous ears had settled flat against his head, not in fear, Harry thought, but in the posture of someone thinking about how honest to be. Then they lifted again, and he said, "Because Dobby looked at Harry Potter and Dobby saw someone who has been told all his life that the cage he is in is just the shape of the world. And Dobby knows what that is like." A pause. "Dobby knows what that is like very well." The two of them sat in the kitchen of number 4, Privet Drive, and looked at each other across the table, a 6-year-old boy with mismatched glasses and a scrubbing brush and a house elf in a filthy pillowcase, and something settled between them that was quieter than a promise but harder to break. "Then let's take them off," Harry said. Dobby started with the ones from the house. He made Harry sit on the kitchen floor, which Harry did without complaint, cross-legged with his back straight because one of the things Aunt Petunia had drilled into him was posture. Dobby stood in front of him and did the reaching thing again, slower this time, more deliberate, and his face went through a complicated sequence of expressions, concentration, then recognition, then a cold fury that was all the more striking for being so quiet. "Hold still," Dobby said softly. "This one is going to feel like taking off something heavy that you didn't know was heavy." He pulled. Harry felt it the way you felt the first warm day after a very long winter, not as an addition but as an absence. Something had been pressing on him, he realized, something had always been pressing on him, and now it wasn't, and the sudden relief of its absence was almost more information than the presence had been. He gasped once, quietly. Dobby was watching him. "Okay?" the elf asked. "Yeah." Harry pressed his hand to his sternum without thinking about it. Yeah. That was there for a long time. Since Harry Potter was very small, Dobby confirmed. He reached again. "This next one will be the same. Ready?" By the seventh binding, Harry's hands were shaking slightly, not from pain but from the accumulating sensation of himself expanding into spaces he hadn't known were there. It wasn't dramatic. There was no light show, no rush of visible magic. It was more like the difference between breathing through a narrow tube and breathing properly. Each removed binding was just a little more room, a little more air, a little more him. By the 12th, he was crying, which embarrassed him, except that Dobby didn't react to it the way the Dursleys would have. Dobby just said, "Dobby knows," in a voice so matter-of-fact and so full of understanding that Harry somehow cried harder and then felt better about crying at all. "The ones from the house," Dobby said, after a while. "Dobby has taken off 9. There is more but they is tangled with other magic that Dobby should not undo yet. Dobby will need to come back." "Can you come back?" Harry asked. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. Without the Malfoys knowing?" Dobby's expression went complicated. "That," he said slowly, "is something Dobby will have to manage." Harry looked at him. "What happens if they find out you didn't do the errand? What do they do to you?" Dobby said nothing. The silence was its own answer. "That's not okay," Harry said, very directly. "That's not okay, and I want you to know that I know that." Something broke open in Dobby's enormous eyes. He recovered quickly, blinking it back, but not before Harry had seen it. "Harry Potter is very kind." "I'm 6, Harry said. "I don't know if I'm kind or if I just know what's unfair because I've seen a lot of unfair. But either way, what they do to you is wrong." Dobby looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, and his voice was very careful, very deliberate, "Harry Potter is the first person who has ever said that to Dobby." The afternoon light had started shifting toward gold. Harry became aware that it was getting close to 5, which meant dinner, which meant Aunt Petunia was going to come home from wherever she was and expect the casserole to be started. "I have to make dinner," he said. "But you'll come back." "Dobby will come back," Dobby said. There was something in his voice that hadn't been there at the start of the conversation, a steadiness, a certainty. Like a decision that had already been made but was only now being said out loud. Dobby has much to think about. And much to do. Harry got up off the kitchen floor and pulled out the casserole dish. He moved efficiently, the way he'd learned to move in this kitchen, automatic and practiced. But there was something different about the way he moved now, a degree of straightness in his back, a quality of deliberateness in his hands. As if the 9 removed bindings had given him not just more magical space but more physical space, more presence in his own body. "Dobby," he said, without turning from the counter. "The man who put some of the bindings on me, Dumbledore. Why would he do that?" Dobby was quiet for a moment. Harry heard the soft pop that meant he'd moved, and when he glanced over his shoulder Dobby was standing closer, face serious. "Dobby thinks," the elf said slowly, "that Dumbledore believed he was doing what was necessary. That Harry Potter with full power, at 6 years old, in a house like this, would be noticed. Would be a danger to himself and others. Dobby thinks Dumbledore was afraid. Of me? For you, Dobby said. Then, after a pause, but also yes. Of you. Harry turned this over. He added the vegetables to the dish with the same even movements. What about the dark ones? The ones that aren't from here and aren't from Dumbledore. Those, Dobby said, and his voice went carefully neutral, are older than anything Dumbledore did. Some of them Dobby recognizes. They is from families, old families, families who knew who Harry Potter was going to be before Harry Potter knew himself. Families who decided to make sure Harry Potter arrived at his destiny already reduced. Harry said nothing. He put the casserole in the oven and set the timer and then turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at Dobby with an expression that was, for a 6-year-old, extraordinarily level. So multiple groups of people, he said, independently decided to put magical chains on a baby. Yes. Because they were scared of what I might become. Or decided to use what you might become, Dobby said, yes. Harry nodded slowly. There was no drama to it, no trembling lip or raised voice. He was 6 years old and he was processing the information with the clear-eyed practicality of someone who had learned very young that the world was not arranged for his benefit and had simply decided to work with what he had. Okay, he said. Then when you come back, we take the rest of them off. All of them. And then we figure out what to do. Dobby looked at him. The evening light was coming through the window now, lower and warmer, and it caught Harry's face and the mismatched glasses and the stubborn set of his small jaw, and Dobby felt something in his chest that was approximately the opposite of the crushing obligation that usually lived there when he was near a wizard. Yes, Dobby said. Dobby thinks that is right. He came back 4 more times over the course of July, always during the hours when the Dursleys were out or asleep, always with the careful silence that house elves could achieve when they chose to. Each visit, he removed more bindings, and each time Harry sat on the kitchen floor with his back straight and his eyes open, watching Dobby's face for information about what was being undone. The Dursley-placed ones came off first, because they were clumsy, amateur things. Someone had clearly been given the knowledge of how to apply magical suppressants and had done so with more anger than precision. Taking them off was like peeling away poorly applied plasters, slightly sharp and then immediately better. The darker ones were harder. These were professional work, old and intricate, layered with the kind of patience that suggested whoever had placed them had known exactly what they were doing and had taken their time doing it. Dobby worked through them with a methodical focus that Harry found oddly soothing to watch. There was no drama to it, no grand magical duel, just a very small being applying an encyclopedic knowledge of elf magic to a problem that most wizards would have said was impossible. Dumbledore's were last, and these were the most complicated because they were, as Dobby had said, tangled with other things, with the curse scar, with the strange double-layered magical signature that Harry had apparently had since he was 15 months old. Dobby worked around these like a surgeon, removing what was suppression while leaving what was structural, and he explained what he was doing in a running low-voiced commentary that Harry listened to with complete attention. This part, Dobby said one evening, fingers ghosting around something invisible near Harry's left temple, is not Dumbledore. This is the curse itself. This is the piece of the dark wizard that lodged here when the killing curse bounced. Dobby is leaving this alone for now. There's a piece of someone else in my head. Harry said. At the edge. Not inside. At the edge. Dobby looked at him. It is not controlling Harry Potter. It is more like a splinter. It is there, but it is not Harry Potter. But it's something that needs dealing with eventually. Yes. But not today. Harry accepted this. He was, by the end of July, getting noticeably different in ways that the Dursleys found unsettling without being able to articulate why. He was the same size, wore the same too large clothes, did the same chores. But there was something about him that made Dudley veer around him in the hallway now rather than into him, and made Uncle Vernon's face do something complicated when he looked too long. As if the house had always contained something large that the Dursleys had managed to ignore by shrinking it, and the shrinking was becoming harder. Harry didn't say anything about it. He did his chores, made the meals, slept in his cupboard, and waited. By the last visit, the 42nd binding came off and Harry sat on the kitchen floor and felt something enormous and quiet settle through his whole body like a warm current in cold water. 3 more to go, the last 3, the oldest, the ones Dobby had been working up to. These last 3, Dobby said, is going to be different. How different? When these come off, Dobby said, Harry Potter's magic is going to assert itself. Dobby does not know exactly what will happen. Magic kept down this long, when it is finally freed, he spread his hands. Dobby has never seen this before. Harry thought about this. Will it hurt anyone? Dobby does not think so. The house might notice. Things might move. The magic in Harry Potter knows its owner. Okay, Harry said. Then let's finish it. Dobby nodded. He reached, both hands this time, and his expression went very concentrated, very still, and Harry felt the first of the 3 deep bindings begin to loosen. It was like a door opening that had been sealed for so long the room behind it had almost forgotten it had a door. It came away slowly, then all at once, and the sensation was completely unlike the others. This wasn't the absence of pressure, this was the presence of something that had always been there and was finally, fully, introducing itself. Harry's magic met him. That was the only way to think about it. It was his, entirely, unambiguously, recognizably his, and it was vast in the way that open country is vast, not overwhelming but simply spacious, full of room that he'd never been allowed to use. The kitchen lights flared and went out and came back on. Every cupboard door opened simultaneously and then closed again. The casserole dish on the counter slid 6 inches to the left and stopped. The electrical tape on Harry's glasses glowed briefly gold and then the crack it was holding together simply sealed itself, smooth and permanent. Dobby removed the second and then the third in quick succession, because once the first had gone the others came loose almost easily, like stitches from a healed wound. Silence. Harry sat on the floor of the kitchen of number 4, Privet Drive, and breathed. His hands, when he looked at them, looked the same. Thin, slightly scraped, nails that Aunt Petunia didn't trust him to cut himself. But they didn't feel the same. They felt like his. Fully, entirely, completely his, in a way he realized they never had before. He turned them over, palms up. A small flame appeared in his right palm, clear and bright and absolutely controlled, hovering above the skin without touching it, because Harry had thought warmth and light and that was what he'd gotten. He looked at it for a moment. Then he thought enough and it went out, and the kitchen was just the kitchen again. Harry Potter is all right? Dobby asked. He was watching Harry with an attention that was almost physical in its intensity. Yeah, Harry said. Yeah, he paused. He was trying to find a word for what he was. I'm myself, he said finally. I don't think I've been myself before. Dobby was quiet. Harry got up off the floor and stood in the kitchen and the house felt smaller than it had, not because anything had physically changed but because Harry fit in it differently now. He was still 6. He was still 4 foot nothing and underfed and wearing Dudley's cast-offs. But he stood like someone who had not been informed that the floor was not his to stand on. Dobby, he said. What are you going to do? The house elf looked at him. His enormous ears were very still. Dobby is going back to the Malfoy house, he said. Dobby has not completed his errand, and Master Lucius will have questions, and Dobby will have to be careful. Careful about what Dobby says and does not say. And then? Dobby seemed to be deciding something. He looked at Harry with those enormous, luminous eyes, and Harry had the distinct impression that Dobby had come to this house with one plan and left 3 weeks later with an entirely different one. Then Dobby has things to do, the elf said. There are others like Dobby. Others who are, in difficult situations. Dobby has known this for a long time and Dobby has done nothing because Dobby did not see what could be done. A pause. Harry Potter has given Dobby a new way to think about that. Harry frowned. I didn't do anything. Harry Potter sat down with Dobby, Dobby said simply. Harry Potter offered Dobby a chair and said that what was being done to Dobby was wrong. Harry Potter is 6 years old and has 45 bindings on his magic and nothing else, and Harry Potter still thought to say that. He looked at Harry with an expression that was, somehow, both fond and entirely serious. Dobby has been alive for 60 years. In 60 years, no one has said that to Dobby. The words landed somewhere in Harry's chest and sat there, heavy and warm and slightly painful. I'll say it again, Harry said, whenever you want to hear it. Dobby knows, the elf said. And that is why Dobby is going to go and do the things that need to be done. He looked at the kitchen, the neat surfaces, the row of Dudley's drawings, the smell of bleach. His expression was not fond. Harry Potter will not be alone in this. Dobby promises. I know, Harry said. He did know. He couldn't have explained how, but he knew with the same certainty he knew his own name that this was the beginning of something rather than the end of it, and that Dobby would come back, and that whatever Dobby was planning to do next would matter. The elf gave him one long, last look. Then he popped out of the kitchen of number 4, Privet Drive and left Harry standing alone in the early August evening with the casserole ticking in the oven and his hands hanging at his sides and 45 bindings worth of himself finally, fully, unquestionably free. Harry went to the window and looked out at the street. The neighbors were doing normal neighbor things, Mr. Jobbins washing his car, the woman from number 7 walking her dog. Nobody looked toward number 4. Nobody ever looked toward number 4. That, Harry thought, was going to have to change. Not today. He was 6 years old and he didn't know enough yet, and he was smart enough to know that not knowing enough was exactly when people made the worst mistakes. But someday. He'd learn first. He'd understand what he was and what the world was and what the 45 chains meant and who had placed them and why. And then, when he knew enough, he would do something about it. He turned from the window and got a glass of water from the tap and drank it standing up, looking at the kitchen, looking at his home that was not his home, looking at the ordinary extraordinary fact of being 6 years old and free in a way he had never been free before. In a house in Wiltshire, a house elf named Dobby appeared in a clean, cold corridor and stood very still for a long moment, looking at the door to his master's study. He straightened his pillowcase. He folded his hands. He arranged his face into the careful blankness that 60 years of service had perfected. And then, underneath it, where Lucius Malfoy would never think to look, something crystallized. Quiet and hard and absolutely committed, the decision of someone who has spent their entire life being told that decisions were not theirs to make and has just, for the first time, made one. Dobby knocked on the study door. Enter, said Lucius Malfoy. Dobby entered. He stood before more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, The Network. 3 years passed. Harry Potter turned 7, then 8, then 9, and the world of number 4, Privet Drive did not know what to do with him. It wasn't that he caused trouble, or not exactly. He still did his chores. He still made meals. He still slept in the cupboard, because picking that particular battle at age 7 had seemed like poor strategy and Harry had always been good at strategy. But there was something about him now that made the Dursleys uncomfortable in the inarticulate way that people get uncomfortable when the thing they've been certain about turns out to be less certain than they thought. Dudley stopped trying to corner him after the incident with the garden hose, which had turned on by itself with significant pressure and pinpoint accuracy. Uncle Vernon had tried the belt twice in the first year after Dobby's visits and had found, both times, that the belt seemed to develop a pronounced reluctance to swing in Harry's direction, a stiffening of Vernon's arm, a sudden loud sound from elsewhere in the house, once an entire shelf of VHS tapes cascading onto the living room floor at the critical moment. Vernon wasn't stupid. He was limited, and cruel, and deeply invested in his own particular vision of normality, but he wasn't stupid. He noticed the pattern. He never said so out loud, because saying so out loud would have required acknowledging something that Vernon Dursley had made a life's work of not acknowledging, but after the second belt incident he stopped trying, and Harry noted this fact and filed it away and never mentioned it. Aunt Petunia was harder to manage because Petunia was not driven by the same blunt force as Vernon. Petunia was driven by fear and ambition and the desperate need to be normal, and those were subtler engines. She watched Harry the way someone watches a thing they believe might bite them, and her voice when she spoke to him had acquired a careful edge, not kinder, but more precise, the way you got precise around something you couldn't afford to be careless with. Harry understood this. He understood it the way he understood most things about the Dursleys, completely, without illusion, and without particularly caring about it. They were not his people. They had never been his people. They were a temporary arrangement. The magic, once freed, had turned out to be exactly what Dobby had suggested it might be, vast, instinctive, and entirely his. It didn't behave like accidental magic, which was what most magical children produce before age 11, bursts of uncontrolled emotion translating into uncontrolled effect. Harry's magic was controlled because Harry was controlled. He had spent 6 years learning to manage a world that didn't want him in it, and that same economy of self applied to magic. He didn't do things by accident. He thought about what he wanted and he reached for it, and it came. He didn't do this in front of the Dursleys. Not because he was afraid of them, he had largely stopped being afraid of them sometime in the first year after Dobby's visits, which had been an enormous relief, but because performing magic in front of Muggles seemed, from everything Dobby had told him, like the kind of thing that would bring official attention, and official attention meant adults, and adults meant people who would try to put him back in some kind of box. He was done with boxes. He practiced in the back garden after dark, when the Dursleys were asleep and the neighborhood was quiet. He practiced in the cupboard with the door shut. He practiced in the small park 2 streets over where the broken climbing frame ensured nobody ever came, and he sat on the roundabout that still worked and did things with light and heat and the fundamental texture of the air that he didn't have names for yet but that responded to him with total consistency and growing ease. Dobby came back, as promised. Not as regularly as that first summer. His visits were constrained by the Malfoys' movements and his own ongoing project of appearing to be exactly what he had always been, but he came, usually arriving between midnight and 3 in the morning, usually via the cupboard, where there was just barely enough room for both of them if Dobby sat on Harry's pillow. He brought books. This was, practically speaking, the most important thing. Magical texts that the Malfoy library contained in abundance, because Lucius Malfoy was many things and one of them was well read in the service of power. Dobby selected these with great care, prioritizing theory over application, history over spell lists, and always the sections on magical law and governance that Lucius found most useful and Dobby found most illuminating for completely different reasons. Harry read everything. He had always been a good reader, partly natural and partly because the school library was the one place in his life that had been reliably warm, well-lit, and free from Dudley, and he'd spent an enormous amount of time there. He read the magical texts with the same focused attention he'd given to everything else, and the things that might have overwhelmed another 9-year-old, the casual brutality of wizarding history, the stratified ugliness of magical politics, the sheer scope of what had been done to magical creatures in the name of tradition, he processed with the clear-eyed practicality that was, by now, one of his most defining characteristics. He had questions, and Dobby answered them, and sometimes Dobby didn't know the answers and said so, and Harry filed the gaps away for later. It was on one of these midnight visits, in October of Harry's 9th year, that Dobby arrived with something different in his enormous eyes. Not the usual combination of warm affection and serious purpose. Something else. Something that crackled. Harry was already awake when Dobby appeared. He'd developed the habit of light sleeping, aware of the pop of elf apparition even through sleep. He sat up in the cupboard and adjusted his glasses and looked at Dobby in the dark, and said, "Tell me." Dobby sat on the pillow. He folded his hands in his lap with a precision that Harry recognized as the physical expression of trying to contain something large. "Dobby has been talking to others," he said. "Others like you." "Other elves, yes. There is a number of elves, now, who know what Dobby is doing. Who know what Dobby is trying to do." He looked at Harry. "Dobby has been careful. Very careful. It has taken 3 years." Harry pulled his knees up to his chest and looked at Dobby. How many? 43, Dobby said. The number hung in the dark. Harry looked at it. You have 43 house elves who are ready, Dobby said. They is from 31 different households. They is in London, in Scotland, in 2 houses in France, 1 in Romania. Some of them are in very bad situations, Harry Potter. Situations that, his jaw tightened. That cannot continue. Harry was quiet for a moment. The cupboard was dark and close and smelled like old shoes, the same as it always had. Outside, the September rain was hitting the Dursleys' roof with a steady persistence that had been going on since early evening. What do you want to do? Harry asked. Dobby wants to free them, the elf said simply. Not all at once. Not carelessly. But there are households where the elves are, where Dobby cannot in good conscience leave them another day. 12 households. 14 elves. And the rest of the 43? The rest are in situations that are bad but survivable. They stay, for now. They gather information. They carry messages. A pause. They are Dobby's network. Harry was 9 years old, cross-legged in a cupboard under the stairs, and he felt the weight of what Dobby was describing with absolute clarity. This wasn't the abstract project of 3 years ago, this was operational. This was real. This was the kind of thing that had consequences. What do you need from me? He asked. Dobby looked at him. Harry Potter's magic has grown. Yeah. Some of the bindings that were on Harry Potter's magic, Dobby has been researching. Some of them was placed by families who are now placing similar bindings on the elves they own. Not the same, exactly, the mechanism is different, but the principle. A magical binding that keeps elves' magic smaller than it should be. Keeps them dependent. Keeps them, he stopped. Manageable, Harry said. Yes. Harry thought about this. He thought about what it had felt like when the last 3 bindings came off, that enormous, quiet settling, that introduction to his own full self. He thought about Dobby carrying 60 years of that, compressed into service, and then thought about all 43 of the elves in the network carrying versions of the same weight. You want me to help remove those bindings, he said. Where Dobby cannot do it alone, yes. There are some that, house elf magic is old and strong, but there are bindings on some of these elves that are made specifically to resist elf magic. Made by wizards who knew what they were doing. The disdain in Dobby's voice was quiet and surgical. Wizards who were very interested in making sure that elf magic could not undo what wizard magic had done. But my magic isn't categorized yet, Harry said. He'd read enough to know this. Magic before Hogwarts existed in a kind of taxonomic limbo, not registered as any particular school or type. It doesn't have a signature that a suppression binding would be specifically designed to resist. No, Dobby said. Harry Potter's magic is, he seemed to search for the right word. It is very large and very individual and it does not particularly care about categories. Okay, Harry said. Then we do the 14 first. When? Dobby blinked. Harry Potter is not asking if this is dangerous. Is it dangerous? Yes, Dobby said honestly. If we are discovered, then we don't get discovered, Harry said. When, Dobby? The elf looked at him for a long moment, and whatever he saw seemed to confirm something he'd been thinking. Saturday, he said. Dobby will bring Harry Potter to 3 houses. The families will be away. Dobby has made sure of this. I've never operated before, Harry said. Elf apparition is different from wizard apparition, Dobby said. Dobby will take Harry Potter with him. It will feel strange. Stranger than having 45 magical chains removed from your soul. No, Dobby admitted. Probably not stranger than that. Then Saturday, Harry said. Saturday was grey and cold with the specific damp chill of an English October that had given up pretending it wasn't nearly November. The Dursleys were out at Aunt Marge's for the day, which Dobby had somehow known in advance and which Harry had stopped questioning because Dobby's information network was thorough in ways that Harry found both impressive and completely unsurprising. Dobby arrived at 7 in the morning and looked Harry over with the assessing eye of someone checking a piece of equipment before a mission. Harry was wearing the least terrible of his Dudley cast-off options, a grey jumper only 2 sizes too large and jeans that actually stayed up with a belt, and had his glasses, which still had the gold-sealed crack from the night of the last binding removal, sitting straight on his nose. "Ready?" Dobby said. "Yeah." Dobby took his hand, and the world did something extremely unpleasant to itself, and then they were somewhere else. The somewhere else was a large kitchen. Not the kitchen of a family home, this was a working kitchen, all stone surfaces and heavy equipment, the kind that belonged to a house with money and staff. The light was early and thin through high windows. It smelled of old wood and cold ash from a fire that had been out since the previous night. Standing in the center of the kitchen was an elf. She was older than Dobby, harder to tell with elves, but there was something in the set of her face and the posture of her small body that suggested years that weren't kind ones. She was wearing what had once been a pillowcase and was now held together mostly by habit. Her ears, when they turned toward Harry, were marked with old scars that she didn't try to hide. "This is Harry Potter," she said. Her voice had an accent Harry didn't recognize, and a flatness that wasn't rudeness but was something more like exhaustion wearing the mask of neutrality. "This is Harry Potter," Dobby confirmed. She looked at Harry with eyes that were conducting a rapid and thorough assessment. Harry looked back at her with the same quality of attention and let the assessment happen. "Bimby has heard of Harry Potter," she said finally. "Dobby speaks of Harry Potter often." "Dobby is generous," Harry said, which made Dobby's ears go slightly pink. Bimby almost smiled. "Almost. The bindings on Bimby," she said, "has been there since Bimby was 10 years old. Bimby's master put them on himself, with a blood restriction charm. Bimby cannot undo a blood restriction. Neither can Dobby." "What can you do without the bindings?" Harry asked. Bimby tilted her head. "Dobby says Harry Potter asks good questions." "What can you do?" "A great many things," Bimby said, and for the first time something moved in her eyes that wasn't exhaustion. "A kind of ember, carefully banked. A very great many things. Things that Bimby's master thinks are impossible, because Bimby's master does not know about the bindings. Bimby's master thinks Bimby is simply limited. He doesn't know he put them on you. His father put them on Bimby. When Bimby first came to the household at 10 years old. The father has been dead 20 years. The son inherited the estate and the staff and did not look closely at what he had inherited." Harry nodded. He looked at Bimby the way Dobby had first looked at him, around her rather than at her, trying to sense the shape of what was there. His magic had gotten very good at this. He could feel it when he reached, a dense tangle of old, formal, blood-worked magic, far more complex than the crude things that had been on him. Whoever Bimby's master's father had been, he'd been skilled and thorough and completely without conscience. "This is going to take a while," Harry said. "Dobby knows," said Dobby. Harry sat down cross-legged on the kitchen floor, the stone cold through his jeans, and reached. Blood restriction charms were, he had read in one of the Malfoy library books, considered a sophisticated piece of magical binding because they used the caster's own bloodline as the key, meaning that theoretically only a blood relative of the caster could remove them. This was, from the perspective of someone trying to create an irremovable binding, elegant. From Harry's perspective, it was a clever trick that relied on the assumption that the only tools available were the ones the caster had expected. Harry's magic didn't particularly care about the assumptions of dead wizards. He pressed against the binding with something that wasn't force, more like water finding the gaps in a dam, and felt it yield in places where it was never supposed to yield, because the blood restriction had been designed to resist elf magic and adult wizard magic, and it had never occurred to Bimby's master's father that someone might come along with something that wasn't quite either. 3 hours later. The stone floor was very cold and Harry's back ached from sitting still, and Dobby had conjured a cushion somewhere around hour 2 which had helped somewhat. But the last of the blood restriction charms came apart under Harry's hands with a sound like a lock turning, and Bimbi, standing in the center of her kitchen, made a sound that Harry would remember for a very long time. Not a cry. Not quite. More like a sound that had been stored up for 50 years and finally found a way out, one breath, almost silent, that contained in it 50 years of what she'd been carrying. She stood there for a moment with her eyes closed and her hands at her sides. Then she opened her eyes, and the ember was no longer banked. "Thank you," she said. And then, with the same flat practicality with which she'd said everything else, "Bimbi will make breakfast." She moved to the stove and did something with the cold firebox that lit it instantly and efficiently, and a kettle went onto the heat, and within 10 minutes there was toast and eggs and tea on the kitchen table, and Harry ate more in one sitting than he usually did in an entire day because Bimbi, it turned out, cooked with the accumulated intensity of someone who had always known they could do more and had spent 50 years proving it in the only domain they were allowed. The toast was extraordinary. The second house was in Edinburgh, a tall Georgian townhouse that Dobby navigated with the ease of familiarity. The elf here was named Kremble, young and male and so tightly wound with suppressed fury that he practically vibrated. His bindings were different, cruder but more recent, placed by the current master rather than an ancestor, and placed badly, which meant they were aggressive and unstable in the way that poorly constructed magic often was. Removing them was less like untangling a knot and more like defusing something. Harry worked carefully, methodically, and when the last one came off Kremble didn't make a sound at all. He just stood in the cellar where he'd brought them, in the dark and cold, and his hands slowly unclenched at his sides, and the look on his face was one that Harry recognized from his own kitchen floor on a summer evening 3 years ago. "You'll go with the others?" Harry asked. "To wherever Dobby is setting up?" "Yes," Kremble said. The word had edges. "The family who bound you," Harry started. "Kremble knows what Kremble wants to do about the family who bound Kremble," the young elf said. His voice was very quiet and very even. "Kremble will not do it. Not because Kremble doesn't want to. Because Dobby says it is not the time, and Dobby has earned the right to say that." "Dobby's right," Harry said. "Not the time." Kremble looked at him. "Yet," he said. Harry held his gaze. "Yet," he agreed. The third house took the rest of the day. There were 4 elves here, in a manor in the Cotswolds, all from the same household, all bearing the same specific variety of binding that Dobby had identified as the work of a single specialist, a wizard whose name Harry now knew from the books, a practitioner of magical restriction who had operated through the 1940s and 50s and died in comfortable obscurity without anyone ever holding him to account for what he'd done. The 4 elves were named Pippi, Marsh, Tallow, and Old Set, and they had been together so long that they had the particular economy of communication of people who had run out of need to say most things out loud. They watched Harry work with a unified attention that was simultaneously unnerving and extremely grounding. He took the bindings off all 4 in sequence, which was exhausting in a way that the previous 2 hadn't been because these were older and deeper and more intricate, and by the time he was done with Old Set the autumn light through the manor windows had gone from gold to orange to the deep blue of early evening, and Harry was sitting on a very fancy carpet feeling like he'd run a considerable distance. "Harry Potter should eat," Dobby said, appearing at his elbow with the focused concern of someone who had been watching for this. "Harry Potter will eat when Harry Potter can stand up again," Harry said. "Harry Potter can eat sitting down. That's fair." Pippi, who had said almost nothing during the entire process, came and sat in front of Harry with a directness that was different from the others. She was very small, even for an elf, and she had a calm about her that wasn't the blankness of suppression but something genuine. She looked at Harry with enormous dark eyes and said, "Why does Harry Potter do this?" Harry looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Harry Potter is 9 years old," Pippi said. "Harry Potter has his own problems. Why is Harry Potter here, in this house, taking off Pippi's chains?" Harry thought about this. He thought about a Tuesday in July, 3 years ago, a kitchen floor, a creature in a filthy pillowcase who had offered him the first honest account of his own life he'd ever received. He thought about the chair he'd pulled out. He thought about what Dobby had said, "In 60 years, no one has said that to Dobby. Because someone did it for me," he said. "And because it matters." Pippi was quiet. Then she said, with enormous dignity, "Pippi thanks Harry Potter." "Don't thank me," Harry said. He looked at her, and at Marsh and Tallow and Old Set, and at Dobby standing nearby with his hands folded. "Help me figure out what to do next." What came next was, it turned out, considerably more complicated than the freeing itself. 14 elves needed somewhere to go. This had been Dobby's problem for the preceding 6 months, and he'd been solving it with the same patient ingenuity that he applied to everything. The solution was a property, a small estate in Yorkshire that had been technically owned by the Potter family trust for 60 years but had been unoccupied and largely forgotten since the death of Harry's grandparents, and which Dobby had found in the course of his very thorough research into what Harry Potter was technically entitled to. This had been a conversation Harry remembered with great clarity. Dobby found what, he'd said. "A house," Dobby said, with the expression of someone presenting a carefully prepared argument. "In Yorkshire. In Harry Potter's family name. With a small but functional estate. Currently maintained by a charm set 60 years ago that will run for another 40, approximately. I own a house. Harry Potter owns several properties. The primary one is in Godric's Hollow, which is complicated. But the Yorkshire estate is uncomplicated. It is simply sitting there, maintained and empty." Harry had stared at him. "Dobby, I sleep in a cupboard under the stairs." "Yes," Dobby said. The word was weighted with a quality of controlled feeling that Harry had learned to read. "Dobby knows." They'd talked about that for a while. The conversation had ended with Harry making a decision that he was not going to do anything about the house yet, because doing anything about the house at age 8 would involve adults and official channels and the specific kind of attention he wasn't ready for. But he'd filed it away, and now, a year later, it was relevant. Dobby had been making quiet use of the Yorkshire estate for 3 months before Saturday. The freed elves arrived there via elf apparition and found it, clean, empty, functional, entirely unregistered in the Ministry of Magic's household tracking because the Potter family trust had never registered it as an active magical domicile and nobody had thought to update the records. "The Ministry tracks magical households?" Harry asked, on the evening of the Saturday, sitting in a kitchen that was considerably nicer than the one at Privet Drive and eating something that Bimby had produced from a pantry she seemed to have filled by sheer force of will. "The Ministry tracks registered magical households," Dobby said, with precise emphasis. "It does not track what it does not know about. And the elves here aren't registered anywhere. When an elf is freed from a household, it drops off the household's magical register. This is something that happens and is recorded and could, in theory, be investigated. But it would require someone to look carefully at 31 household registers and notice a pattern." A pause. "The families whose elves Dobby has freed are not the kind of families who file careful paperwork. They tend to assume that elves who disappear have simply gone. They don't look for them. They look briefly," Dobby said. "And then they acquire new elves. Because elves are available and do not cost what they used to cost, and it is much easier to get a new one than to ask why the old one left." Harry ate his food and thought about this. The kitchen of the Yorkshire estate had a different quality than the Privet Drive kitchen. There was magic in the walls of this house, old and settled, the same way old wood has a specific smell. The Potter family magic, presumably. His family's magic. Around the table, Bimby and Kremble and Old Set and Pippi and the others were eating and talking, actually talking, in a way that it was immediately clear they had never been able to do before. Not about anything in particular. Just talking. Kremble and Tallow were arguing about something that seemed to be theoretical and entirely pointless, and were doing it with a heat and animation that suggested they were arguing for the joy of being able to argue, for the sheer luxury of having opinions and expressing them loudly. Harry watched them and felt something loosen in his chest. "Dobby," he said quietly. The ones still in place, the other 29 in the network. Are they safe enough for now? For now, Dobby said. Most of them is in situations that are manageable. Dobby checks on all of them, regularly. And the information they're gathering? Dobby's expression sharpened. This is what Dobby wants to talk to Harry Potter about. He glanced around the table, then back at Harry. There is something that the network has found. Something that Dobby has been thinking about very carefully for several weeks. Tell me. The bindings on Harry Potter, Dobby said. Dobby told Harry Potter that some of them were placed by old families, families who knew who Harry Potter was going to be, before Harry Potter knew himself. Yeah. Dobby told Harry Potter that some of those families were trying to keep Harry Potter reduced. So that Harry Potter could not fight what those families want to have happen. Harry was very still. Voldemort, he said. Several of the elves at the table flinched. Dobby simply said, the Dark Wizard, yes. There are families who expect him to return. Who are preparing for that return. And who spent the last 9 years making sure that when he returned, the one person who might be able to stop him was in a cupboard under some stairs and had 45 chains on his magic. Harry looked at Dobby across the table. Who? Lucius Malfoy, Dobby said. The name sat in the kitchen with the weight of something long known. Among others. But Lucius Malfoy is the one whose plans Dobby knows best, for obvious reasons. For obvious reasons, yes, Dobby had spent 3 years in the Malfoy household as Lucius's apparently loyal house elf, listening to everything. Harry had always appreciated the elegant efficiency of this, and had never made Dobby feel terrible about what it required. What are his plans? Harry asked. They is complex and ongoing, Dobby said. But the relevant part, the part that concerns Harry Potter, is this: Lucius Malfoy has recently noticed that something has changed. Specifically, he has noticed that the suppression bindings he helped place on Harry Potter no longer seem to be active. His enormous eyes held Harry's. He doesn't know exactly what has happened. But he is paying attention now. He has assigned someone to watch Privet Drive. The kitchen table had gone quieter. The argument between Kremble and Talo had stopped. Who's watching the house? Harry asked. A contact of Malfoy's. Not a wizard, a squib, so as to avoid detection by magical monitoring. He passes the house every morning and reports. Dobby tilted his head. He has noticed that Harry Potter is not small in the way Harry Potter used to be. He does not have the words for what has changed, but he has reported that the boy seems different. Harry nodded. He thought about this with the same even practicality he applied to everything else. A 6-year-old boy with magical chains was a managed variable. A 9-year-old boy without magical chains, who had been quietly teaching himself magic for 3 years, was a different kind of variable entirely. Lucius Malfoy doesn't know what I can do, Harry said. No. He knows something changed, but he doesn't know what or how much. Correct. Harry looked down at his hands. Pippi's extraordinary dinner was still warm in front of him. The kitchen of his family's house in Yorkshire hummed with old magic and new voices and the particular quality of air that had changed because 14 people who were previously compressed had been allowed to expand. Then we have time, Harry said. Not a lot. But some. Dobby thinks so. The Hogwarts letter comes in 2 years, Harry said. When I'm 11. And when I go to Hogwarts, Malfoy's going to have much better access to information about what I can and can't do. Yes, Dobby said. Which means the next 2 years matter a great deal. Harry looked around the table. 14 elves, freed and fed and beginning the enormous, complicated work of remembering what it was like to be themselves. 29 more still in place, gathering information. A house in Yorkshire full of old Potter magic. A 9-year-old boy who had 45 fewer chains than anyone expected. Then we use them, Harry said. 2 weeks later, the network expanded by 6. A month after that, the Yorkshire estate had become something that required a name. Dobby called it the Free House, with a capital F and a capital H, in the particular way that elves named things they cared about. The name stuck. The elves who were still bound and working their positions had developed a communication system that was elegant in the way all good elf solutions were elegant, working entirely in the gaps that wizards created by refusing to look directly at the beings who served them. Messages traveled via cleaned glassware, the specific arrangement of household objects, the exact fold of laundry. It was, Harry noted, a language that had always existed but had previously only been used for mundane coordination. The network had turned it into something else entirely. Harry visited the Free House whenever Dobby could arrange transport, which was roughly once a fortnight. He worked with the freed elves, not as their superior but as someone with a specific skill they needed, and the distinction mattered and was maintained. Bimbi had opinions about this and expressed them with the same flat directness she applied to everything, and Harry listened to her the way he listened to Dobby, completely, with his full attention, taking what was useful and asking questions about what he didn't understand. His own magic continued to develop with the accelerating pace of something that had spent years compressed and was now given room. He was 9 years old and he could do things that he'd read about in the advanced sections of the Malfoy library books, things the books marked as requiring years of academic study. He didn't think this was because he was exceptional, or not only because of that. He thought it was because magic, for him, was not an external tool to be learned and deployed but an intrinsic part of himself that he was simply becoming more fluent in. Like the difference between learning a foreign language and discovering that you already speak it natively. He was careful not to be arrogant about this. He was also, in the private space of his own thinking, honest about it, because arrogance and denial were both forms of inaccuracy and Harry didn't have much patience for inaccuracy. It was Kremble who first articulated what Harry hadn't said out loud yet. They were in the garden of the Free House, which Marsh had started growing things in with the systematic fury of someone given dirt and permission, and Harry was working on something with fire that he was trying to make precise instead of just large, and Kremble was watching him with his characteristic intensity. "You is going to fight," Kremble said. "Not a question." Harry looked up from the small controlled flame in his palm. "Eventually, yeah. The Dark Wizard. The one who is coming back. Him. And the people who are clearing the path for him." Harry looked at the flame. "Made it smaller, more concentrated, a point rather than a spread. And anyone who thinks the answer to a dangerous person is to chain up everyone around them." Kremble was quiet for a moment. "Dobby says Dumbledore is not a bad man." "I know," Harry said. "I've thought about that. And I think good people can do bad things when they're scared," Harry said. "And I think Dumbledore has been scared for a very long time, and I think the things he did while scared caused an enormous amount of damage. And I think both of those things are true at the same time." A pause. "I also think that him not being bad doesn't mean I'm going to let him make decisions for me." Kremble tilted his head. "What will Harry Potter do when Harry Potter meets Dumbledore?" Harry closed his fist and the flame went out. He looked at Kremble with an expression that was entirely level. "Tell him the truth," he said. "All of it. Clearly and directly. And see what he does with it. And if Dumbledore tries to, then we'll find out what Dumbledore is made of," Harry said. He said it without drama, without heat, in the same voice he might have used to discuss dinner plans. Kremble looked at him for a moment with his characteristic unblinking intensity. Then, for the first time since Harry had met him, Kremble smiled. It was a small smile, sharp-edged, but it was real. "Dobby chose well," he said. Harry almost said Dobby didn't choose me, Dobby found me, but he stopped himself because he understood what Kremble meant and because it was the kind of thing that could be argued about forever and probably mattered less than what they were all actually doing. In a manor in Wiltshire, Lucius Malfoy sat at his desk in the late October evening and read the latest report from his contact at Privet Drive. The report was not alarming in any specific detail: a 9-year-old boy in too large clothes, doing chores, going to school, entirely unremarkable. But there was something in the accumulation of small unremarkable details that Lucius found, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, unsettling. He set the report down and picked up his glass and looked out the long window at the Malfoy grounds, grey and disciplined in the October rain. Nearby, in the kitchen corridor, he could hear Dobby's quiet movements, the elf attending to some household task with the unobtrusive efficiency that Lucius had always found satisfactory. He had no reason to distrust Dobby. In 3 years of owning him, Dobby had been perfectly adequate. The failed errand 3 years ago, the trip to the Potter boys' home, Dobby had explained with a story about magical interference and Muggle alarm systems that had been plausible enough. Lucius had been irritated but not suspicious. He was, however, a man who had survived as long as he had by being very good at sensing when something in his environment had shifted without his knowledge. And something had shifted. He couldn't locate it. He couldn't name it. But it was there. He drank his wine and watched the rain and thought about Harry Potter, 9 years old and unremarkable in Surrey, and felt, with the particular instinct that had served him very well for 45 years, that unremarkable was exactly the wrong word. In the kitchen corridor, Dobby carried a tray of clean glassware to the cupboard, setting each glass down in precisely the arrangement that meant, to the elf in the Edinburgh townhouse, Wednesday, usual time, bring what you found. His face was entirely expressionless. His enormous eyes were entirely calm. He closed the cupboard door and went back to work, and was perfectly, unimpeachably, the elf he had always appeared to be. Chapter 3, The Boy Who Chose the Hogwarts Letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry was 11 years old, eating toast at the kitchen table. The Dursleys had given him a room 2 years ago, a development that had less to do with generosity and more to do with Petunia's increasing discomfort with the specific quality of quiet that radiated from the cupboard at night, when the owl came through the kitchen window that he'd left open precisely because he'd been expecting it. Not the exact day, but roughly. Dobby had warned him. The owl was tawny and self-important and landed on the table beside his toast and stuck out its leg with the air of something that had been doing this for years and found it beneath its dignity. Harry untied the letter, gave the owl a piece of crust which it accepted with minimal grace, and turned the envelope over. Mr. H. Potter, the second bedroom, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Precise addressing. He filed that away. Someone had checked recently, which meant someone had eyes on the house in some capacity beyond Malfoy's squib. He set that aside and opened the envelope. The letter was exactly as the books had described. Formal, old-fashioned, listing required equipment with the particular thoroughness of an institution that had been writing the same letter for 400 years and saw no reason to change it. Harry read it twice, then folded it and put it in his back pocket and finished his toast. Uncle Vernon came downstairs at 7:30 and saw the owl, which had not left, and did the particular thing his face did when confronted with evidence of the thing he'd spent years pretending wasn't real, a kind of violent blankness, as if his face was refusing to process the information. "It's my Hogwarts letter," Harry said, before Vernon could say anything. "I'll be going to Diagon Alley to get my school things. I can take myself." Vernon stared at him. In the old days, in the days before the bindings came off, before 3 years of steady development, before Harry had grown into something that number 4, Privet Drive had no framework for, Vernon would have had something to say about this. Several things, delivered at volume. But those days had ended gradually and then completely, and Vernon now had the specific energy of a man who had assessed a situation and decided that engaging was not in his interests. "Fine," Vernon said, and poured his coffee, and did not look at the owl. Harry put his plate in the sink. "I'll be back by dinner." He walked out of the kitchen and out of the house and down Privet Drive in the early July morning, and 2 streets over in the small park where the roundabout still worked, Dobby was waiting. Diagon Alley hit Harry like a wave. He'd been prepared for it, Dobby had described it in detail, and he'd read enough to have a structural understanding of what it was, but preparation and experience were different things, and for the first 30 seconds he simply stood in the entrance from the leaky cauldron and took it in. The noise, the color, the sheer density of magical life packed into a crooked street that shouldn't physically contain as much as it did. People everywhere. Families with children who had the look of first years, nervous and excited in roughly equal measure. Older students moving with the easy confidence of people who'd done this before. Vendors calling out, owls overhead, the smell of something caramelized from a cart nearby mixing with the sharper smell of fresh parchment from a stationery shop. And magic. Everywhere, in the air and the walls and the people, the ambient presence of a world that had always been here and that Harry had been sealed away from for 6 years and had been pressing toward for 3. He stood in the entrance for exactly long enough to take the measure of it, and then he walked in. He went to Gringotts first, because Dobby had been very clear about the order of operations and because Harry had been thinking about the order of operations for 2 years and agreed. The goblins were exactly as described, efficient, watchful, operating in the specific register of beings who have conducted business with wizards for centuries and have maintained their dignity through the transaction by being better at it than the wizards were. The teller who handled Harry's account had a name that Harry asked for and got, which seemed to briefly surprise the goblin. Sharp Fong, the goblin said. Your account has been, minimally accessed. I know, Harry said. My guardian has been drawing a small amount monthly for my care. I'd like a full accounting, and then I'd like to discuss the broader structure of the Potter estate. Sharp Fong looked at him. The look lasted longer than a goblin usually spent looking at anything. You're 11, he said. Yes, Harry said. Is that a problem for Gringotts? A pause. Then something moved in the goblin's face that might, in a different kind of face, have been appreciation. No, Sharp Fong said. Gringotts does not discriminate on the basis of age. We discriminate on the basis of account standing, which is, he pulled up a ledger. Substantial. Good, Harry said. Then let's talk. They talked for 40 minutes. Harry came out of Gringotts with a full accounting, a manager's card, an appointment for a more thorough estate review in August, and the particular feeling of someone who has just confirmed that the world contains more options than they'd been told about. He also came out with a money bag that was heavier than he'd expected and lighter than it could have been, because he'd asked for spending money appropriate for school supplies and nothing more. The goblins had seemed faintly confused by this, in the way that people got confused when someone with access to a large amount of money asks for a small specific amount instead of reaching for everything available. Harry found this confusion understandable but not particularly interesting. He went to Madame Malkin's for robes. There were 2 other students there, a round-faced boy who was being fitted with the slightly stunned expression of someone who'd lost something important recently, and a girl with a great deal of brown hair and a book open on her lap despite the fact that she was actively being measured, which Harry found immediately interesting. The round-faced boy was Neville Longbottom, and Harry knew this not from the name but from Dobby's descriptions, the son of the Longbottoms, the family whose tragedy the Death Eaters had orchestrated shortly after Voldemort's fall. Neville had the look of someone carrying weight he didn't fully understand. He was pleasant and slightly hesitant and he knocked over a pin cushion twice during the fitting and apologized to it once. It's a pin cushion, Harry told him. It doesn't mind. Neville looked up. He seemed surprised that Harry had spoken to him, the reflexive surprise of someone who'd learned to expect to be ignored. Oh, he said. Right. I'm Neville. Harry. Neville's eyes went to Harry's forehead, which Harry had gotten very used to. He didn't have the scar covered because covering it was slightly laborious and he didn't care enough about it to bother, but he watched people's faces when they saw it and Neville's face did something that was different from most. Not awe, exactly. More like recognition, the particular look of someone who has heard a story so many times it has become part of the furniture of their inner life, and then encounters the story as a person. Gran talks about you, Neville said. What does she say? Mostly she says you're important, Neville said, with the frank artlessness of someone who hasn't yet learned to edit himself. And that we should hope you turn out all right. Harry almost smiled. How am I doing so far? I think okay, Neville said, after genuine consideration. The girl with the book looked up. She'd been clearly listening the whole time. You're Harry Potter, she said, with the tone of someone confirming a hypothesis. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about you. Good things. Mostly historical context, she said. The books don't agree on the details of what happened the night. She stopped. Reconsidered. Sorry. That was rude. We've just met. It wasn't rude, Harry said. The books don't agree because the people writing them weren't there and were working from incomplete information. Hermione stared at him. How do you know that? Because I've read them too. And because I was there, technically, though I don't remember it. He paused. Also because I have access to information that isn't in the published books. Hermione's eyes went wide and then immediately sharpened with a quality that Harry recognized as intellectual appetite barely contained by social politeness. What kind of information? The kind that requires a long conversation, Harry said. Are you going to be in London for the rest of the summer? She blinked. Yes. Then maybe we can have that conversation before September, he said. He looked at Neville. You too, if you want. Neville looked as if nobody had ever said you too, if you want to him before in this context and didn't know what to do with it, and then decided to do the obvious thing. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'd like that. They finished being fitted. Hermione, it turned out, was Muggle-born and had been doing research since receiving her letter with a thoroughness that Harry found genuinely impressive. She knew the basic history and the major figures and the structure of wizarding society with the precision of someone who treated preparation as a moral obligation. She asked him 3 pointed questions while they were leaving the shop and Harry answered all 3 directly and watched her face recalibrate each time, adjusting her model of him away from whatever she'd expected toward whatever he actually was. He thought they were going to get along very well. He went to Ollivander's alone. The shop had the particular quality of places that had been doing one specific thing for a very long time, a sense of accumulated purpose, quiet and dense. Wandered in the narrow space between the high shelves. Harry stood in the middle of the shop and waited, and Mr. Ollivander appeared from between the shelves like something that had been there all along and had decided to become visible. He was very old, with eyes like polished silver, and he looked at Harry the way goblins looked at accounts, with professional assessment stripped of sentimentality. Harry Potter, he said. I wondered when I'd be seeing you. He came closer, and his gaze went to Harry's forehead and then, more interestingly, past it. His silver eyes did something complicated. Give me your wand arm. Harry extended his right hand. Ollivander produced a tape measure from somewhere and it began taking measurements on its own, which Harry watched with mild interest. Curious, Ollivander murmured, not to Harry exactly. He was looking at the air around Harry with the same quality of attention Dobby had used 3 years ago on the kitchen floor. Very curious indeed. What is? Harry asked. Your magical signature, Ollivander said. He met Harry's eyes directly. I have been measuring wizards and witches for 70 years, Mr. Potter. The magical signature of an 11-year-old is generally, developing. Provisional. You have had some education. Self-directed, Harry said. Mostly practical. Self-directed, Ollivander repeated, as if testing the taste of the words. At 11. Practically. He turned back to his shelves. Interesting. Well. Let's find your wand. The process took longer than it usually did. Not because Harry rejected wands, he tried 6, and each produced an effect, just not the right effect. The 7th was a disaster involving a shelf of boxes and a brief incident with blue sparks that Ollivander cleared up with 3 words. The 8th made the shop lights flicker in a way that Ollivander found sufficiently interesting to note aloud. The 9th, Harry picked it up and the shop went very quiet. Not in the way that quiet usually happened, not the absence of sound but the presence of stillness, as if the room was paying attention. The wand was holly and 11 inches and Ollivander was watching him with those silver eyes completely unreadable, and Harry turned the wand once in his fingers and felt it the same way he felt his own magic, immediately, personally, unambiguously his. Holly and phoenix feather, Ollivander said. 11 inches. Supple. He paused. The phoenix who gave that feather gave only one other. The other feather is in the wand of, another pause. Of the wizard who gave you that scar. Harry looked at the wand. He turned it again. The phoenix feather inside it had no opinion about its previous sibling, as far as Harry could tell. It was entirely committed to the present occupant. Interesting, Harry said. Curious is the word I'd use, Ollivander said. Curious and curious again. He looked at Harry with an intensity that was neither intimidating nor entirely comfortable. I wonder what you'll do, Mr. Potter. I truly wonder. So do I, Harry said honestly. He put 7 galleons on the counter. Thank you. He walked out of Ollivander's into the bright July sun of Diagon Alley, wand in his back pocket, and stood on the cobblestones for a moment. The alley moved around him. Families and students and the ordinary commerce of the wizarding world, going about its business. He was buying his second-hand copy of the Standard Book of Spells Grade 1 at Flourish and Blots, from the use section, out of principle and practicality both, when the shop changed. He felt it before he saw it, a shift in the ambient quality of the room, the way a room shifts when someone important walks into it and most people respond without knowing why. Harry looked up from the bookshelf. Lucius Malfoy came through the door of Flourish and Blots with the particular entrance of someone who owned everything in his field of vision, or intended to. He was tall and pale with long white blonde hair and the kind of beauty that was slightly too precise, slightly too deliberate, like something designed rather than grown. Beside him walked a boy who was clearly his son, same coloring, same bone structure, though the boy wore his differently, with less assurance and more performance, the way children wear their parents' mannerisms before they've decided which to keep. Behind them both, walking 3 steps back with the characteristic posture of the bound, was Dobby. Harry put the book back on the shelf with perfect calmness and turned to face the room. Dobby's enormous eyes found Harry's immediately. There was one instant of communication, a flicker of something between them that had no words, and then Dobby's face went back to perfect blankness and Harry understood. Normal. Now. Here. Malfoy Sr. moved through the bookshop with the fluid ease of someone doing a routine performance and doing it well. He glanced at other families the way powerful people glanced at furniture, noting without acknowledging, categorizing without engaging. His eye moved over Harry the same way. And then it stopped. It was a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, but Harry was watching for it and caught it. Malfoy's eye stopped on Harry's face, on the scar, probably, but also on something else. On the not small of Harry. On the quality of stillness and readiness in how he was standing. The gap between what this man had been told to expect and what he was currently seeing. Harry met his gaze steadily. Not aggressively. Just, met it. Eye level, even and unhurried, with no particular intention other than looking at someone who was looking at him. Something moved in Malfoy's face. Something fast and complicated, gone before it fully arrived. You're Harry Potter, Malfoy said. Not a question. Yes, Harry said. Malfoy crossed the shop toward him with the smoothness of a man who moved through spaces as if they arranged themselves for him. He stopped at a comfortable distance, close enough to be personal without being aggressive. Up close, the too precise quality of him was more obvious, the kind of person who had always had everything arranged to his specifications and had never been required to accommodate the disorder of the world. Lucius Malfoy, he said, as if this should mean something. It did, but not the thing he intended it to mean. I know, Harry said. A beat. Do you? I'm not sure we've met. We haven't. But you have an interest in my affairs, which makes knowing your name useful. Something sharpened in Malfoy's pale eyes. Very fast. Very controlled. I'm not sure what you mean. Sure you do, Harry said pleasantly. You've had someone watching my house for 2 years. The boy next to Malfoy, Draco, it would be, went very still in the particular way of children who have learned that stillness is the appropriate response when adults do something unexpected. Lucius Malfoy looked at Harry for a long, slow moment. His face was a controlled surface, expensive and maintained, but underneath it something was running calculations at speed. He was reassessing, visibly, the gap between the managed variable he'd been tracking and the person currently looking at him without flinching. "You're a remarkable child," he said finally. "I'm an 11-year-old buying school books," Harry said. "That's not remarkable. What's remarkable is a grown man feeling the need to monitor an 11-year-old from a distance for 2 years." Another beat. Malfoy tilted his head slightly, the way a chess player tilted their head when they encountered an unexpected move. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Neither, I think," Harry said. "I'm just accurate." Draco Malfoy made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh, quickly covered. His father didn't glance at him but his jaw tightened a fraction. "We'll be seeing each other at Hogwarts, I imagine," Lucius said. His voice had a smoothness to it that never quite stopped being a threat. "My son Draco is starting this year." "Is he?" Harry said, and looked at Draco directly. The boy looked back with an expression that was working very hard to be his father's expression and not quite managing it. There was something underneath the performed Malfoy blankness that was younger and less certain. "Good. I'll see you there." He looked back at Lucius and the look said, without any particular hostility, that the conversation was over, and that Harry was not going to stand there and wait for a dismissal because dismissals were only available to people who accepted the premise that they needed permission to leave. He turned back to the bookshelf, selected his used copy, and carried it to the counter. Behind him, he heard Lucius Malfoy say something to Draco in a low voice, and Draco's response, and then the rustle of their departure. He paid for the book. In his peripheral vision, Dobby moved past carrying an armload of purchases, head down, perfectly unremarkable. Harry's fingers rested briefly on the counter. A small pressure, barely perceptible. Dobby passed 2 feet away and his fingers twitched once at his side, an almost invisible gesture, a touch of hands that wasn't quite a touch, the briefest possible acknowledgement. Harry picked up his book and walked out into the sun. The Weasley family was impossible to miss. They came into Diagon Alley like weather, vivid and loud and numerous, all the same remarkable red hair, all moving with the cheerful purposeful chaos of a family that had long since stopped pretending to be organized. Harry was outside Gringotts waiting for a detail that Sharpfong had wanted to add to his paperwork when they came past, and he stepped aside to let them through and one of the twins, impossible to tell which, caught his eye and grinned as if they'd met before. "All right," the twin said. "Yeah," Harry said. "First year," said the other twin, appearing at the first one's shoulder with the seamless coordination of people who had been finishing each other's sentences since they learned to talk. "Yeah. Same," said the first twin. "Fred Weasley." "George," said the second. They were both looking at Harry with the particular bright attention of people who were highly interested in most things and had decided Harry was one of them. Harry. Something passed between them, a flicker, the rapid communication of people who thought at the same frequency. Then Fred said, with the conversational ease of someone making an entirely reasonable observation, "You're the Harry Potter, yeah?" "Just Harry," Harry said, which was what he always said, and watched them consider this and decide they approved. "Fair enough," said George. "Our mum's been expecting you to be either terrifying or tragic. You don't seem like either." "Give it time," Harry said. Both of them laughed at this, genuine, uncalculated. Harry thought immediately and without much deliberation that he liked them. He liked Neville and he liked Hermione and now he liked these two, and there was something clarifying about the experience of moving through Diagon Alley as himself, fully himself, and finding that the world contained people he could like. He met their youngest brother Ron briefly, a slightly nervous-looking boy with a smear of something on his nose who seemed simultaneously overwhelmed by Diagon Alley and deeply invested in pretending he wasn't, and their mother Molly, who looked at Harry with eyes that went through several things in rapid succession, ending at a warm complicated concern that Harry recognized as the expression of someone who had heard a story a child was part of and felt the weight of it. "Are you shopping alone, dear?" she asked. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm fine, thank you." She looked like she wanted to say more and was holding herself back from it with some effort. Harry appreciated the effort. "Well," she said. "If you need anything, I'll ask," Harry said, with enough sincerity that she seemed reassured. "Thank you." He left them at the entrance to the bank and kept moving. He had 3 more stops and a time constraint and an appointment to keep. The appointment was in a side room off the leaky cauldron, and the only people who knew about it were Harry and Dobby and the 2 people already waiting when Harry arrived at 2 in the afternoon. The first was a witch Harry had never met but had read about extensively, Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, severe and precise in the way of people who had spent their careers in institutions trying to make institutions work. She had the kind of face that had made a decision to cut away everything decorative and keep only what was functional. The second was a goblin. Not Sharp Fong, this was an older goblin with a face like a carved cliff face and the specific energy of someone who had been in rooms with important people for so long that the concept of important people had stopped affecting their blood pressure. Dobby had arranged both of these meetings via the network, through channels Harry had learned not to ask too many questions about because Dobby's operational security was meticulous and Harry trusted it. What he knew was this: Bones was aware of irregularities in several high-profile magical cases and had been quietly looking for information that the official channels weren't providing. The Goblin, Goldtooth, represented a Gringotts division that dealt in historical magical rights and was interested in certain aspects of the Potter estate that had been managed in ways that were, Goldtooth had indicated via Dobby, suboptimally legal. Harry sat down. He looked at both of them. They looked back at him. "I appreciate you coming," he said. Bones had her arms folded and her expression was the expression of someone who had agreed to a meeting with a source and was now processing the fact that the source was 11. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "Yes." "You're 11. Also yes." Dobby's message said you had information about multiple illegal magical acts committed against a minor, and about organized interference with that minor's legal estate. She looked at him without blinking. "I was expecting someone older." "I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry about that. The information is real regardless." "You arranged this meeting," Goldtooth said. His voice was the specific flatness of a goblin conducting business. "You have concerns about the Potter estate management." "About several things," Harry said. He reached into his school bag and put a folder on the table. Dobby had helped compile it over the previous 6 months, documented evidence, carefully sourced, organized with the precision that Dobby applied to everything. The illegal magical bindings are the most urgent. There were 45 of them. Placed by multiple parties, over 6 years, on a child who had no capacity to consent or resist. "I have documentation." He opened the folder and pushed it toward Bones. She looked at the first page without touching it. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but in the specific controlled way of someone professionally trained to manage their reactions who has just seen something that tests that training. "Where did this come from?" she said. "A combination of my own memories and the analysis of an elf who removed the bindings," Harry said. "The elf's name is available if needed. The magical signatures on some of these bindings are verifiable, they're documented in the Malfoy family's own library records." Bones looked up. "The Malfoys. Among others." Harry looked at her steadily. Lucius Malfoy was involved in placing 3 of the 45. The others were placed by different parties with different motivations, not all of them surviving, but Malfoys are verifiable and recent. Bones was very still. She had the energy of someone who had just been handed a weapon and was doing rapid calculations about what it cost and what it bought. "There's more in the folder," Harry said. "The estate irregularities are a separate issue but also documented. Goldtooth's people can speak to the legal aspects." The goblin had pulled the folder and was reviewing it with the speed of someone who read complex documents for a living. "The Potter Trust Management," he said, without looking up, "has involved several unauthorized redirections. Minor individually. Cumulative, over 10 years, he turned a page. Substantial. Dumbledore has authority over the trust," Harry said. He was appointed magical guardian at the time of my parents' deaths. The question is whether those appointments were properly authorized, and what the terms allow him to do, and what they don't. Bones looked at him. You're building a case against Albus Dumbledore. I'm establishing facts, Harry said carefully. What those facts constitute is a legal question. You're 11. You mentioned that. A long pause. Bones sat back in her chair and did something with her expression that might have been the suppression of something she'd decided she didn't want to show. You understand what you're doing, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Harry said. Malfoy, you know, is well connected. The moment he knows you're building documentation, he already suspects something has changed, Harry said. He doesn't know how much. I'd rather move faster than he expects than wait for him to catch up. Bones looked at him for a very long time. Then she reached out and picked up the first page of the folder and began to read it properly. I'll need to verify everything, she said. Independently. Of course, Harry said. I have sources available for all of it. And if this checks out, she kept reading. If this checks out, you understand that the investigation this opens will be significant. I'm counting on it, Harry said. Goldtooth set down the folder with a small, precise sound and looked at Harry with the flat appraisal of someone conducting a final assessment. Gringotts, he said, has its own interests in the Potter estate irregularities. Those interests align with yours in the present circumstances. I know, Harry said. That's why you're both in the room. He got back to Privet Drive at 6:30 with a bag full of school supplies and a folder full of copies. Bones had kept the originals, and ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter because Aunt Petunia's schedule had moved without accommodating him, which was normal, and then went to his room and sat on the bed. The room still had Dudley's old furniture in it and a window that looked out at the garden and the bare fact of 4 walls and a ceiling instead of the familiar geometry of the cupboard, which Harry had never actually gotten entirely used to. He was more comfortable in small spaces. He suspected he'd be more comfortable in the dormitory at Hogwarts, which from the descriptions had a certain enclosed quality. Dobby appeared at 10, which was their standard arrangement, and sat on the foot of the bed and looked at Harry with the expression he'd developed over the past 5 years, the one that combined genuine warmth with the specific alertness of someone running several parallel operations and monitoring all of them at once. How did it go? Harry asked. Malfoy was thoughtful, Dobby said. All the way home in the carriage he was quiet, which is not usual. Draco tried to tell him about the encounter in the bookshop and Malfoy Sr. said very little. He's adjusting his estimate of me. Yes. Dobby folded his hands. He does not yet know how significant the adjustment needs to be. But he is, alert now, in ways he was not before today. That's fine, Harry said. Bones has the documentation. Goldtooth has the estate files. Whatever Malfoy figures out, the pieces are already moving. Dobby nodded. Then, in a different tone, the Free House has 18 elves now. Harry looked at him. When did, last night? For more from a household in Bath. The situation was urgent. Kremble handled it. Dobby paused. Kremble is very capable. I know he is, Harry said. He leaned back against the headboard. 18. And the ones still in place in households? 31. The network is growing faster now. There are elves who have been waiting for something to wait for. Once word moves through the right channels, he turned his hands over, a gesture that meant exponential in Dobby's personal vocabulary. How long before we can't keep this quiet anymore? Harry asked. Dobby considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. Ministry, he said, will notice unusual patterns in household elf records within 6 months, if the rate stays as it is. If it increases, sooner, Harry said. Yes. Then we should decide, Harry said, what we want them to notice. Dobby was quiet, and then he said, Dobby has been thinking about this. I know, Harry said. You've been thinking about it since before it was a question. There will have to be a moment, Dobby said slowly, when it is no longer a hidden thing. When it becomes declared. When what Dobby is doing becomes something the world has to respond to. A declaration, Harry said. Yes. But not yet. Not until there are enough voices. Not until the network is strong enough that what the wizarding world does in response cannot simply undo it. He looked at Harry. When Harry Potter goes to Hogwarts, things will move faster. Harry Potter at Hogwarts with full magic and no chains that will be noticed. I'm not going to hide it, Harry said. Dobby knows, Dobby said, and something warm moved through his enormous eyes. Dobby would not ask Harry Potter to. Dumbledore is going to be, Harry started. Complicated, Dobby said. Yes. He put 12 of those bindings on me, Harry said. Not with heat. Just as a fact. 12. On an infant. Because he was scared of what I might become and because he wanted to manage what I became, and he did it unilaterally without telling anyone and without my knowledge or consent. And he's been managing the narrative around me for 11 years. Yes, Dobby said. And he might genuinely have believed it was for my protection. Yes. Which makes it worse, not better, Harry said. Dobby thinks, said Dobby carefully, that Harry Potter and Dumbledore are going to have a very significant conversation. Probably more than one, Harry said. Yes. A pause. But Harry Potter should know, Dobby has watched Lucius Malfoy for 6 years. And Dobby has watched Dumbledore, through the network, through what others see. And they are very different men with very different problems. He looked at Harry with the directness he always used for important things. Malfoy knows what he is doing and doesn't care. Dumbledore doesn't know what he's doing, and cares too much. Harry sat with that for a moment. Honestly, I think the second one is harder to deal with. Dobby thinks so too, the elf said. A man who knows he's wrong can be argued with. A man who is certain he is right, has to be shown, Harry said. Has to be made to see it. And that takes time. Yes. Harry looked at the ceiling of his room, Dudley's old glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck up there from years ago, a few of them falling off at the edges. He'd never removed them. He'd always found them faintly comforting, the idea of permanent stars that had been put in a room for a child who didn't really live here anymore, left behind for the next occupant who also didn't really live here. 2 months, he said. 2 months and then Hogwarts. 2 months, Dobby confirmed. Okay, Harry said. Then we use them. He closed his eyes and listened to the neighborhood settling into evening, Mr. Jobbins' car, the distant bark of the number 7 dog, the Desley's television through the ceiling. The ordinary sound of a world that didn't know what was coming. Downstairs, Vernon Desley watched the news and did not look at the owl that was still, inexplicably, sitting on top of the refrigerator. Petunia moved around the kitchen with the precise, contained movements of a woman actively managing her own awareness of what she knew and had chosen not to know. The ordinary sound of a world that had chosen not to look at what was right in front of it. Harry opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling stars and thought about everything that was already in motion, 18 elves, 31 agents, a folder on Amelia Bones' desk, a goblin reviewing estate documents, a wand that felt like a part of himself lying on the bedside table. He thought about Lucius Malfoy in his carriage going home, being quiet in ways he wasn't usually quiet. He thought about Albus Dumbledore, in whatever room Albus Dumbledore sat in during summer evenings, who would learn within the hour, the network was efficient, that Harry Potter had been in Diagon Alley today and had held his own in a conversation with Lucius Malfoy and had left behind him a series of meetings and a series of documents and a set of moving pieces that were going to require a response. He thought about a 6-year-old on a kitchen floor with a scrubbing brush and 45 chains, learning for the first time that the world was not the shape he'd been told it was. He thought about Dobby, sitting across a kitchen table in a pillowcase, saying, in 60 years, no one has said that to Dobby. Get some rest, Harry told Dobby. You actually need to sleep sometimes. Dobby sleeps when things are quiet, Dobby said. When is it ever quiet? When Harry Potter is asleep, Dobby said, with a dignity that was entirely genuine. Harry laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the laugh of someone who was allowed to find things funny. Dobby's ears went pink again. The glow stars did their quiet work on the ceiling. In 2 months, Hogwarts. Harry Potter, who had once been a 6-year-old with a scrubbing brush and 45 chains and no name for what he was, turned over in his bed and went to sleep. And he was not afraid of anything. Chapter 4, Hogwarts Burns Quiet. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry Potter was on it, and the castle was going to have to deal with that. He'd found platform 9 3/4 without difficulty. Dobby had described it twice and Harry had a good sense of spatial logic, and had loaded his trunk onto the train 20 minutes early, which meant he had his pick of compartments and chose one at the far end of the train where the light came in at a good angle and he could see the platform through the window. He sat with his book open on his knee and watched the platform fill up with families, the specific controlled chaos of a large group of people managing emotions they didn't all have words for. Neville found him first, slightly out of breath, with a toad in a small container and the expression of someone who'd already lost something and found it again twice this morning. He dropped into the seat across from Harry with the particular relief of someone who has spotted a familiar face in an unfamiliar crowd. "My Gran cried," Neville said. "Yeah. She said she was just proud. But she was definitely crying." He settled his toad container on the seat beside him. "She also told me 14 things to remember, and I've already forgotten 4 of them." "Which 4? Neville thought about it. "That's the problem. I don't know which 4. Hermione arrived precisely at 10:45 with a trunk that appeared to contain roughly twice the standard requirement and a prefect's guide to Hogwarts that Harry was reasonably certain was not an official publication. She sat next to Neville, stacked 2 books on her knee immediately, and looked at Harry with the expression she'd been wearing since Madame Malkin's, a kind of ongoing calibration, like someone continuously updating a very detailed map. "I've been researching house characteristics," she said, without preamble, "to try to determine likely sorting outcomes." "What did you conclude?" Harry asked. "That the criteria are deliberately vague and probably more nuanced than the popular characterizations suggest," she said. "The Hat's historical songs indicate it's looking for primary traits, not exclusive ones. So someone could have Gryffindor bravery and Ravenclaw intelligence simultaneously, and the sorting depends on which one is more fundamental." "What's your primary trait?" Neville asked her. Hermione paused, which was interesting. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then said, "I'm not entirely sure. I used to think intelligence, but I think it might actually be thoroughness. Which could be Hufflepuff, actually." She looked at them both. "What about you two?" "Gran says I should be Gryffindor," Neville said, with the tone of someone describing a sentence being handed down. "She was Gryffindor. My parents were Gryffindor. I'm fairly sure she'll transfigure me personally if I'm not." "You'll probably be Gryffindor," Harry said. "But not because of your Gran." Neville looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because you came and sat with someone you barely knew in a shop full of strangers," Harry said. "And you're here, and you look nervous, but you came anyway. That's the relevant data point." Neville looked at his toad container for a moment. "That's a very kind way to look at it." "It's an accurate way to look at it," Harry said. The train moved. King's Cross slid away behind them and England opened up beyond the windows, suburbs first, then green, then the particular rolling openness of the countryside that Harry had only seen from the Dursleys' car on family trips he had never been included in. He pressed his face briefly to the glass the way he hadn't done since he was much younger, taking in the way the light moved across fields, the geometry of hills in the distance. The Weasley twins found them somewhere around Birmingham, appearing in the compartment doorway with the coordinated energy of people who operated as a single entity divided into 2 bodies. "Excellent," said Fred, surveying the compartment. "Non-terrible company. Ron, come in, stop hovering." Ron Weasley, who turned out to be the nervous brother from Diagon Alley with the something on his nose, appeared behind them looking like someone who had been trying to find his brothers and was now regretting it on principle. He was tall for his age and slightly gangly in the way of people who've grown faster than they'd expected, and he looked at Harry with the combination of recognition and self-consciousness that Harry had gotten used to. "Hi," Ron said. "Hi," Harry said. Ron sat down. He had a slightly battered trunk and a rat in his pocket that he didn't introduce but that seemed comfortable there. He looked at the window and then at Harry and then at the window again and finally said, with the air of someone who has prepared a question and decided to just ask it, "Is it weird that everyone knows who you are? It would be weirder to know who I am and not know anything about what that means," Harry said. "So actually having the context is better." Ron thought about this. "That makes sense," he said, apparently surprised that it did. Hermione immediately asked Ron something about wizarding history and they were off, and the compartment settled into the warm noise of 6 people who had just decided, collectively and without announcing it, that they were going to like each other. Harry sat with his book open and didn't read it very much, because he was busy watching the countryside and thinking about what was ahead. Not anxiously, anxiety had never been his dominant mode and 5 years of active preparation had made it less so. More with the focused attention of someone walking toward a thing they've been heading toward for a long time and can see clearly now. The castle appeared at dusk, which Harry suspected was deliberate, the timing, the light, the way they came around the final curve of the lake and it was suddenly just there, enormous and ablaze with windows, sitting on its cliff above the water as if it had grown there rather than been built. Even Harry, who had read extensive descriptions and who had learned to manage his reactions, went quiet. "Oh," said Hermione softly. "Yeah," said Neville. "Every year," Fred said, with the proprietary warmth of someone showing off something they love, "every year it does that." The boats across the lake were cold and slightly damp and excellent. Harry sat in one with Neville and a girl he hadn't met whose name was Sue Lee and who looked at the castle with the particular intensity of someone taking a photograph with their eyes, and the castle got bigger and more extraordinary as they approached until it was simply everything, filling the entire sky. And there was a moment, just one, crossing the lake in the dark, where Harry let himself feel the full weight of what it was. Not the politics or the conflict or the work ahead. Just the fact of it. A school. His school. The place where the world he'd been preparing for 5 years had its actual physical address. He was going to do things in this castle that mattered. That would change things. He could feel it the way he felt magic, not as a premonition but as a simple awareness of what was real. Then the boats touched the bank and they climbed out and went up the steps and Hagrid knocked on the door and the door opened and Minerva McGonagall stood on the other side with the expression of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and still took it seriously, and they went in. The entrance hall was enormous, lit with torches that made the stone walls look like something out of a history book. The first years clustered together with the unconscious herding instinct of people who are not sure what comes next, and Professor McGonagall explained the sorting with the brisk efficiency of someone who had given this speech many times and had long since cut it down to its essential components. Harry stood with his year group and felt, for the first time clearly since arriving, the castle itself. That was the only way to describe it. Hogwarts had magic in its walls in a way that was categorically different from any magical location he'd been in before, older, stranger, not the accumulated magic of objects or people but something almost geological, the magic of a place that had been saturated with the stuff for 1,000 years. It pressed against his own magic with the mild curiosity of something vast and ancient briefly paying attention, and Harry paid attention back. The castle noticed him noticing it. There was a fraction of a second of something that was not quite communication but was not quite not communication either, a mutual acknowledgement, 2 things that were large in different ways being briefly aware of each other. Harry blinked. The entrance hall was still full of first years. Neville leaned over. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," Harry said. "The castle just said hello." Neville stared at him. Then, because Neville had good instincts about Harry by now, he simply said, "Oh," and looked at the walls with slightly more wariness. The Great Hall, when they walked in, was full of the entire school watching them with the combined scrutiny of several hundred people who had been anticipating this for various reasons. Harry felt the scrutiny the way he'd felt Malfoy's gaze in the bookshop, as a thing that was happening that didn't require him to react, just to note. He heard his name move through the older students in a wave. The whispers, the craning of necks, the pointed nudges. He looked forward, at the staff table, and found it immediately. Albus Dumbledore sat at the center of the table, and he was already looking at Harry. He was older than Harry had imagined from the descriptions, old in the way of things that had been here a very long time, with the white beard and the half-moon spectacles and the particular quality of stillness that very powerful people sometimes had, the stillness of someone who had learned long ago that they didn't need to fill space with movement because the space arranged itself around them anyway. He looked at Harry with eyes that were very blue and very sharp and full of something that was not quite simple emotion. Recognition, yes. Something warmer under that. And underneath the warmth, so controlled and deeply buried that most people would have missed it entirely, the specific quality of a man looking at something he built and discovering it has become something else. Harry met his gaze. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. He simply met it, eye level, with the same quality of attention he'd given Lucius Malfoy in the bookshop, and he watched Dumbledore's eyes do something complicated and then compose themselves. The stool came out. The hat came out. Sorting began. Harry listened to the hat's opening song, which was characteristically riddling, and thought about what Hermione had said on the train, primary traits. He thought about what his was. Not intelligence, though he was intelligent. Not bravery, though he wasn't afraid of much. Not loyalty or ambition in their straightforward forms. Something more like will. A particular quality of commitment to what he decided was true and right, regardless of what the world thought about it. Not stubbornness, exactly, because stubbornness was blind and this wasn't. More like the determination to stay honest about reality and act from that honesty no matter what acting from it cost. When his name was called, the wave of whispers he'd already heard went through the room again, louder this time, and he walked to the stool and sat down and the hat came over his head and the world went dark. "Oh," said a voice, quiet and entirely interior. "This is different." "Hello," Harry thought. "Most students don't greet me," the hat said. It sounded amused. "Most students are too nervous. Most students haven't had 5 years to prepare for this conversation." "No, they haven't." A pause. Something that felt like a thorough examination, conducted very quickly, the sensation of being looked at from multiple angles simultaneously. "You've had an extraordinary preparation. Not formal, not what this school would recognize as formal. But extraordinary nonetheless. Where are you putting me? You're asking rather than letting me tell you. I'm interested in your reasoning." The hat made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in that direction. "Very well. You could be Ravenclaw, the intellect is real and the love of knowledge is genuine. You could be Slytherin, the ambition is significant and the strategic capacity is well above average. Hufflepuff has a claim on you that most people wouldn't see and I'll acknowledge it exists." A pause. "But the core of you, the thing that everything else is organized around, is a refusal to accept a false version of reality and an absolute commitment to acting on what's true. That is Gryffindor. The oldest kind of Gryffindor, the kind that built the house before it became associated only with recklessness." "I know," Harry thought. "Yes," the hat said. "You did know. You've known for a while." Another pause, this one different, heavier. "There's something else here. Something old and strange, tangled with your scar. I know about that too. And it's there. It's not me. I'll deal with it when I need to." "Most people would be frightened," the hat said. "I don't have time to be frightened of things I can't currently fix." A beat of silence. Then the hat said, with something that was definitely warmth, "I hope you get everything you're working toward, Mr. Potter. I genuinely do. This castle hasn't seen anything quite like you in a very long time. Then, to the room, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, set it back on the stool, and walked to his table with the same level composure he'd maintained throughout. He sat down next to a third year who immediately clapped him on the shoulder and said something he didn't catch because he was looking at the staff table again. Dumbledore was still watching him. His face was entirely composed and entirely unreadable except for those sharp blue eyes, and in them something was happening that Harry couldn't fully name but that had the quality of a very intelligent person rapidly revising a plan. Harry held his gaze for a moment and then looked away, because there was food arriving and he was actually hungry, and priorities were priorities. The ghost arrived at breakfast the next morning. Not an actual ghost, the actual ghosts of Hogwarts had been perfectly pleasant, nearly headless Nick having welcomed them the previous evening with the specific hospitality of someone who had been doing this for 400 years and still meant it. This was a different kind of ghost, a man shaped like a shadow, positioned at the end of the Gryffindor table with a plate of food he was not eating. Professor Quirinus Quirrell had a stammer and a purple turban and the specific quality of wrongness that Harry noticed the way you noticed a smell, not sharp or violent but persistent and off. He'd felt it at the sorting feast and felt it again now, a presence that was not quite Quirrell's, a thing behind the thing, layered underneath the nervous professor like something wearing a man. Dobby had briefed Harry. He knew what Voldemort returning would look like. He knew the current theory, that a wraith without a body sought hosts, sought physical anchors, sought ways back into the world. He also knew that Quirrell had disappeared for a year before returning to Hogwarts with the stammer and the turban and the wrongness, and had done so with Dumbledore's knowledge and apparent lack of significant alarm. Which meant either Dumbledore didn't know what was in Quirrell or Dumbledore knew and had a plan for it that he hadn't told anyone. Harry thought the latter was more likely. He also thought that this was exactly the kind of unilateral decision-making that he and Dumbledore were going to have to talk about very directly, very soon. He ate his eggs and watched Quirrell and said nothing. Classes were revelatory in the way that encountering a formal framework for things you'd been doing informally was revelatory, like finding out that the language you'd been speaking natively has grammar rules, which made the grammar rules interesting without making the language less fluent. He had more power and control than any first year was supposed to have, and he calibrated his output to be noticeably above average but not so far above as to require explanation. Not because he was hiding, he'd made a specific decision not to hide, but because there was no point in performing. He knew what he could do. The classes would catch up. Herbology was genuinely interesting. McGonagall's Transfiguration class was the first time he'd encountered formal instruction that actually mapped to his own experience of magic, and he paid close attention to her because she was teaching him the vocabulary for things he'd been doing without names. She noticed his attention and seemed to approve of the quality of it, which was different from approving of the volume of his output. Charms was Flitwick, who squeaked once when he called the register at Harry's name and then recovered beautifully and taught them Wingardium Leviosa with the meticulous care of someone who had long since understood that the basics contained everything important if you looked at them closely enough. Harry's feather went up on the first try and he held it steady at 4 different heights in sequence because he was curious about the precision available, and Flitwick watched this with the bright eyes of someone making notes. Defense against the dark arts was Quirrell, and Harry sat in the back row and paid absolute attention to the person behind the person, and did nothing to make that attention obvious. Potions was Snape. Harry had read about Snape. Dobby had told him things about Snape. The network had information about Snape that painted a picture of a man of genuine complexity, a Death Eater turned spy, a man who had been Dumbledore's instrument for years and who had done genuinely dangerous work in that service, and who was currently managing a series of emotional histories that made him difficult to interact with and impossible to simply categorize. He swept into the dungeons with the particular drama of someone who had decided long ago that they would move through the world as a statement, and began his opening speech, and Harry listened to it with the same focused attention he gave everything. Then Snape called his name. Potter. A pause. The dungeons were very quiet. Our new celebrity. Harry looked up from his parchment. He met Snape's eyes, dark and sharp and full of something complicated that wasn't entirely dislike, or not only that. Sir, Harry said. Tell me, Potter, What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry looked at him steadily. Draught of living death. One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. A pause. The combination of asphodel and wormwood is interesting symbolically. In the old herbal traditions both are associated with grief and death respectively. The potion is sometimes called the grief's end because of it. A silence. Snape's expression had done something that he'd immediately controlled, but Harry had caught the fraction of it, something that was not what he'd expected to see. Where would you look, Snape said, more slowly, if I asked you to find me a bezoar? Stomach of a goat. It's an antidote to most poisons. The most effective ones come from Persian goats specifically, which is why the highest quality ones in the apothecaries are expensive. Another silence. Snape looked at Harry with the unreadable intensity of someone recalibrating at speed. The difference, Snape said quietly, between monkshood and wolfsbane. There isn't one. Different names for aconite. Harry looked at him. You know all this is from books, Professor. The interesting questions would be the practical ones. What happens when the ratios are wrong? What properties affect the timing of the reaction? The class had gone very still. Hermione, to Harry's left, looked like someone watching a tennis match. Neville, to his right, looked like someone watching a natural disaster. Snape looked at Harry for a long moment. Something moved in those dark eyes that Harry could not fully read, and then it closed again. Evidently, Snape said, someone has done their reading. He turned away, robes sweeping. Let's see if the rest of you have managed so much as the table of contents. Harry looked back down at his parchment. He wasn't sure what he'd expected from that exchange, but he was fairly certain of what he'd gotten, a man who had expected a famous, underprepared, arrogant child and had gotten something else, and who was now working out what that meant. That was fine. Harry had time. Dumbledore asked to see him on the 5th day. The note arrived at breakfast via a 5th-year prefect, formal and brief. Mr. Potter, please come to my office after your last class today. A.D. Harry folded it and put it in his pocket and kept eating. Dumbledore wants to see you. Ron said, from across the table. Yeah. What for? Probably to assess me, Harry said. Figure out what I know and what I don't know and what his options are. Ron stared at him. That's a very specific expectation. It's based on available information, Harry said. He went to his classes, History of Magic, which was Binns who was literally a ghost and taught like one, and another Transfiguration period, and at 5 o'clock he climbed to the 7th floor and found the stone gargoyle and said the password that Dobby had obtained through entirely undisclosed means, and went up. Dumbledore's office was exactly as described, circular, full of humming silver instruments on every surface, portraits of old headmasters sleeping or pretending to sleep behind their canvas faces, a magnificent bird on a perch that turned out to be Fawkes, who looked at Harry with large, intelligent eyes and made a sound that was barely audible but felt like warmth. Dumbledore himself was behind his desk, and he looked at Harry as he came in the way he'd been looking at him since the Great Hall, with those sharp blue eyes doing a great deal of work underneath a pleasant surface. Harry, he said. Please, sit down. Harry sat. He put his bag on the floor and folded his hands on his knees and looked at Dumbledore with the same even attention he'd been giving him since the start. I imagine, Dumbledore said, that you have been curious about a great many things. Yes, Harry said. I've been wanting to speak with you since your arrival, Dumbledore said. His voice had the particular quality of someone who had spent decades choosing words carefully and for whom careful word choice was entirely unconscious. There are things we should discuss, things about your past, your protection, the circumstances that, the 45 bindings, Harry said. A silence. It was, Harry thought, an extraordinary silence, the silence of a very intelligent, very experienced man encountering something he had not prepared for. Dumbledore's face remained composed. His eyes did not. They moved through several things in very rapid succession, and then they settled on something that was not quite the warm authority he'd started with. I see, Dumbledore said. Dobby removed them, Harry said. About 5 years ago. All 45. Including the 12 that carried your signature. Dumbledore was very still. You've known for 5 years. Yes. And you've been, he stopped. His eyes moved over Harry with a fresh assessment, and Harry watched him arrive at things he hadn't previously allowed himself to arrive at. The control, the preparation, the quality of readiness in how Harry sat and spoke and looked. You've been using that time. Yes, Harry said. Another silence, this one different. Dumbledore stood up slowly and moved to the window behind his desk, and stood looking out at the grounds, the darkening sky, the distant tree line, the lake catching the last light. His hands were clasped behind his back. Harry, he said. What was done to you, the bindings, were done with the intention of protection, Harry said. I know. Or that's what you told yourself. Dumbledore turned from the window. His expression was not angry. It was something considerably more complicated than angry, the expression of a man who has been confronted with the gap between his intentions and their effects and is determining, in real time, what to do with it. I am not, Harry said, here to punish you for it. I'm not here to be punished by you for having undone it. I'm here to tell you that I know what was done, that I know why, that I disagree with the reasoning even while I accept that you believed in it, and that we need to have an honest conversation about what happens next. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The office hummed quietly around them, instruments measuring things, portraits pretending not to listen. You're 11 years old, Dumbledore said. You've said that, Harry said. Or the equivalent. A number of people have said it since September 1st. I don't find it as relevant as most people seem to. Something moved across Dumbledore's face. Harry could not entirely name it, but it had elements of something he hadn't expected, something almost like relief, underneath everything else. As if some part of Dumbledore had been carrying the weight of what he'd done for 11 years and had just been permitted to set part of it down. What would you like to discuss? Dumbledore said. He came back to his desk and sat down, and the quality of his attention shifted, became less managed, more genuine. Quirrell, Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. There's something on him, Harry said. Behind him. I felt it at the sorting and I can feel it in every class. I know what Voldemort is and what he's capable of, and whatever is living behind Quirrell's turban is not a healthy presence. You are remarkably perceptive, Dumbledore said. You know about it, Harry said. It wasn't a question. A pause. Yes. And you've allowed it because Voldemort in a weakened state, in a controlled environment, with me aware of his presence and his likely objectives, Dumbledore said, is preferable to a weakened Voldemort operating outside my awareness in an uncontrolled environment. What's he after? Harry said. There is something in this school that he wants, Dumbledore said carefully. The Philosopher's Stone. Harry had read Flammel. Had read about the stone and its properties and had connected those properties to the obvious need of a disembodied Dark Lord trying to re-embody himself. It's here, isn't it? 3rd floor corridor. A longer pause. The connected thinking you're doing, Dumbledore said, is, I know it's here, Harry said. He'll come for it before the year is out. Probably end of term when you're called away, whatever's pulling Dumbledore away at the critical moment, I'd think about whether that's coincidence. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. What would you propose? I'd propose, Harry said, that you stop making unilateral decisions about what information I can handle and start treating me as someone who has a stake in this. Because I do. He killed my parents. He tried to kill me. And whatever piece of him is living in my scar, he watched Dumbledore's face confirm what Dobby had told him. There it is. You know about that too. Harry, I'm not asking you to fix it right now, Harry said. I'm not asking for everything at once. I'm asking you to look at me and understand that I am not the carefully managed variable you thought I was, and I am not going to become one, and the question of whether we work together or around each other is entirely determined by whether you can accept that. Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. The office hummed. Fawkes made the soft warm sound again from his perch. The fire crackled. "You were a baby," Dumbledore said finally, and his voice was lower and without performance, more tired and more honest than anything he'd said yet. "And I was afraid. And the things I did from that fear, I believed they were right." "I know," Harry said. "I believe you believed it." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "That doesn't mean they were right." "No," Dumbledore said. "It doesn't." The fire popped. The portraits shuffled carefully in their frames. Fawkes turned his golden head and looked at Harry with those ancient warm eyes. "There are things," Dumbledore said slowly, "that you deserve to know. Things I have kept, in reserve, for what I believed were the right reasons." He paused. "I am beginning to suspect that my calibration of what the right reasons were has been, imperfect." "Beginning to," Harry said, and there was no edge to it, no sarcasm. Just the word, placed with accuracy. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Beginning to." He looked at Harry across the desk, and something in the famous blue eyes was simply, undefended, an old man looking at a consequence of his own choices and trying to be honest about what he saw. "What do you want from me, Harry?" "The truth," Harry said. "All of it. As much of it as you have. And in return I'll tell you things I know that you don't. Some of which are going to be difficult to hear." "Such as?" "Such as what Lucius Malfoy has been planning and preparing for over the last decade," Harry said. "And what the current status of the Death Eater network looks like. And what a house elf revolution looks like when it's already 3 years and 47 elves into progress." Dumbledore went very still. 47 elves, he said. 47 free elves, Harry said. "As of last week. Dobby's been thorough." The word Dobby landed in the room with a weight that suggested Dumbledore had not made the connection he should have made years ago about the errand that had never been completed. His expression moved through recognition, recalculation, and then something that was almost rueful admiration. "Dobby," Dumbledore said softly. "Of course. He's extraordinary," Harry said. "I'd recommend not underestimating him." "I won't make that mistake again," Dumbledore said. "And then, with the weight of genuine admission, I've made a rather substantial number of those. I intend to make fewer." Harry looked at him. He thought about what Dobby had said, a man who is certain he is right has to be shown. He thought about whether Dumbledore was capable of being shown. He thought about the expression currently on Dumbledore's face, which was the expression of a man being shown and choosing not to look away from it. "Then we have a lot to talk about," Harry said. "We do," Dumbledore said. He conjured tea, which appeared immediately in 2 cups with the ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, and pushed one across the desk toward Harry, and they talked for 2 hours while the castle settled into night around them. November moved fast. The school developed its own relationship with Harry in the gradual collective way that institutions develop relationships with unusual people, first watchful, then curious, then divided, and finally something more complicated than either. Gryffindors liked him with the warmth of people who had claimed something good for themselves. Ravenclaws engaged with him with the intellectual respect they gave anyone who demonstrated genuine capacity. Hufflepuffs were warmer than he'd expected, though he thought this was partly Neville's doing. Neville turned out to be uncommonly good at making people feel included, which was a kind of magic that didn't show up in any spellbook. Slytherin was interesting. Draco Malfoy had arrived with a performance prepared, the effortless superiority of his father's manner wearing the face of an 11-year-old, and it was a decent performance. He deployed it confidently for the first 2 weeks. And then Harry, who had been watching without particularly engaging, sat next to him in the library one Tuesday afternoon because it was the only available seat and started reading, and after 10 minutes of waiting for Harry to either leave or say something challenging, Draco said, "You're not going to tell me to move." "Why would I?" Harry said, without looking up. "I'm a Slytherin." "I noticed." Harry turned a page. "Are you under the impression that matters to me?" A pause. Most Gryffindors. I'm not interested in most Gryffindors, Harry said. I'm interested in accurate information. Slytherin is a house with a bad reputation that has a complicated relationship with its own history. That's not the same as everyone in it being a problem. Another pause, longer this time. Harry could feel Draco recalibrating. He'd seen it in Malfoy Sr. and he saw it here, the same quality of intelligence, working with different inputs. Your house, Draco said carefully, doesn't have a complicated relationship with my house. Our houses don't think about it clearly, Harry said. That's not the same thing. Draco was quiet for a while. Then he said, and it came out before he'd decided to say it, my father thinks you're. He came home from Diagon Alley and he was quiet for 3 days. Yeah. Harry said. He's not usually quiet. A beat. He's not usually. Draco stopped. Concerned? Harry offered. Draco looked at his book. He says you're going to be trouble. He's right, Harry said pleasantly. But not for you, specifically, unless you decide to be trouble for me first. Draco looked up. For once the performance had slipped entirely, it was just a kid, 11 years old, sitting in a library trying to work out where the lines were and who he wanted to be relative to them. I'm going to need to think about that, Draco said. Take your time, Harry said. They both went back to reading. The Troll happened in October. Not the night it was supposed to happen, or not exactly. Harry had known, from Dobby's briefing, that there would be an incident around Halloween, something connected to Quirrell's increasing erratic behavior as the thing wearing him pushed harder against its constraints. He'd warned Hermione over breakfast that morning to stay away from the bathrooms in the East Wing during the Halloween feast, which she'd taken seriously because she'd learned to take Harry seriously, and so she hadn't been in the bathroom when the Troll arrived and there was no dramatic rescue. Instead there was Harry, who had slipped away from the feast during the confusion, following the wrongness trail of Quirrell's presence toward the third-floor corridor, because there was only one reason to cause a distraction significant enough to empty most of the school, and it wasn't the Troll. The corridor was warded. Harry unpicked the wards efficiently and moved through them and found himself in a sequence of obstacles that were clearly designed with significant craft, each one a different magical discipline, well considered, clearly Dumbledore's work in its scope and probably 6 professors' work in its specific components. He got through them. Some with magic, some with the simple advantage of understanding what they were designed to stop and noting that in several cases he didn't fit the expected profile of the thing being stopped. The Devil's Snare didn't bother him. The key puzzle was elegant and he appreciated it even while moving through it at speed. The chessboard he crossed in 4 minutes by thinking about it as a geometry problem rather than a game. The potions puzzle he solved in under a minute because he'd read about it in a book. And then he was in the last chamber, and there was no one there. He stood in the room and looked at the empty space where the mirror of Erist sat, waiting for the right person to stand in front of it and find the stone. No Quirrell. No Voldemort. He looked around carefully. Then he looked at the mirror. His reflection looked back at him. It was doing something that his actual self was not doing, it was smiling, slightly, and it had a different quality of presence. Not desire, exactly. More like recognition. The mirror was supposed to show you your deepest desire, but what Harry saw looked less like want and more like arrival, himself, here, but with everyone around him that he'd been building toward. Dobby, Neville, Hermione, the elves at the free house, a woman who might have been his mother, a man who might have been his father, in the particular blurred way of people you've only seen in photographs. He looked at it for a moment. Then he reached into the mirror's magic with the ease of someone who had spent 5 years developing a very personal relationship with the concept of things that were held and hidden and that needed to come free, and the stone dropped into his hand. He looked at it. Small and red and impossibly warm. He was putting it in his pocket when Quirrell walked in behind him. "Stop," said Quirrell. He had his wand out, and the stammer was entirely gone, and the wrongness that Harry had been feeling all term was now a full presence rather than a background note. The thing behind the man, fully forward, Voldemort looking through Quirrell's eyes with an intensity that was nothing like the tired malevolence Harry had expected. It was hungrier than that. More desperate. The particular quality of something that had been diminished for a decade and wanted the world to know it was still here. "Give me the stone," said Quirrell. His voice was both his own and not, layered in a way that made the air feel wrong. Harry looked at him with steady eyes. "No," he said. "You have no idea what you are dealing with," said the voice that was Quirrell and Voldemort both. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Harry said. "A Dark Lord who is currently occupying a host that the host did not consent to, who wants a stone that would restore him to a body, so he can come back and finish what he started 15 years ago." A pause. "You are remarkably calm for a child," said the voice. "I've had time to prepare," Harry said. "Give me the stone," the voice said again, differently this time, deeper, the human overlay falling away. "Give it to me and I will let you live. I have no quarrel with you yet." "You killed my parents," Harry said. "Yes." "No apology. Not even interest." "Yes, I did. And I will kill you, unless," Harry moved. "Not away." He moved toward Quirrell with a directness that was so contrary to expectation that it broke the rhythm of whatever Voldemort had been about to say. He closed the distance in 2 seconds and put his hand on Quirrell's face. The effect was immediate and total. Not fire, something more like the magic Harry had been building for 5 years, recognizing its inverse with absolute clarity, the same way the stone had dropped from the mirror into his hand, the same way the bindings had come off on the kitchen floor, the same way the castle had briefly said hello at the sorting. His mother's sacrifice had left something in his skin. Dobby had told him this, had found it when removing the bindings, had identified it carefully, a protective charm older and more fundamental than anything academic, the specific magic of someone who had chosen death over betrayal. It lived in his hands and in his presence, and Voldemort, who had burned Quirrell's arm trying to take the stone by force from the mirror's protection, now burned in a different and more absolute way. Quirrell screamed. Harry held on. Not from cruelty, from clarity. He held on because he'd thought about this, had actually thought about this specific scenario, and had concluded that the kindest outcome for Quirrell was to end his possession as quickly as possible, and the most effective way to do that was to make the possession no longer viable. Quirrell's knees went. Harry stepped back. The man crumpled to the stone floor, and the wrongness, the thing behind the thing, left the room in a way that Harry felt as a sudden absence of pressure, a rushing cold, a sound like a held breath released. Then there was just Quirrell, unconscious on the floor of the chamber, and Harry, and the stone in his pocket, and the quiet of a castle that had been watching. Dumbledore arrived 3 minutes later, having apparently sprinted up from the feast despite being 110 years old, and he came into the room with his wand drawn and Fawkes on his shoulder and stopped at the sight of Harry standing calmly next to an unconscious Quirrell. He took in the room. He took in Harry. He took in the fact that the stone was not in front of the mirror where it should have been. "Is it safe?" he said. "Meaning the stone." Harry took it from his pocket and held it out. Dumbledore crossed the room and took it from his hand with the particular gentleness of someone taking something irreplaceable from someone who doesn't have to hand it over and is doing so anyway. "Voldemort?" Dumbledore said. "Gone. For now." Harry looked at Quirrell. "He's alive. He'll need treatment, the possession leaves damage. He should see a healer who knows what they're treating." "Yes," Dumbledore said. He was looking at Harry with those sharp blue eyes and the expression that had been developing since their first conversation 5 weeks ago, the ongoing revised assessment, the man who was learning to see something clearly rather than as he'd expected it to look. "You knew this was going to happen tonight," Dumbledore said. "I suspected," Harry said. "The distraction was too convenient. And you came down alone." "I came down prepared," Harry said, which was not the same thing and both of them knew it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Fawkes made the warm sound. The fire in the corner crackled. On the floor, Quirrell breathed shallowly. "I owe you," Dumbledore said, and it came out without the managed quality that most of his speech had, without the careful framing of a man accustomed to saying everything from inside a protective layer of wisdom and authority. It came out plain. A great deal. "I know," Harry said. He looked at Dumbledore directly. "The stone should go back to Flamel. And then it should probably be destroyed. He'll agree, Dobby's people have spoken to him." Another pause. "Dobby has been in contact with Nicholas Flamel. Dobby's network is thorough," Harry said. "He mentioned I might have mentioned that." "You did," Dumbledore said. He almost smiled. "He did, through different channels." He looked down at the stone in his hand. "You're right. It will be returned, and destroyed." He met Harry's eyes. "And we have more to discuss." "We always do," Harry said. He picked up his bag from where he'd set it down by the doorway, practical, he'd carried it in, no point leaving it in a corridor, and walked toward the exit. Dumbledore called after him. "Harry." He turned. "The things that are moving," Dumbledore said carefully. "The things you told me about in September, the network, the freed elves, the documentation with Madame Bones," he paused. "They've grown since then." "Yes," Harry said. "They're going to become visible," Dumbledore said. "Soon. I imagine you know that." "I'm counting on it," Harry said. He held Dumbledore's gaze. "Are you going to be on the right side of it when it becomes visible?" The question sat in the chamber between them, honest and direct, without accusation but without the softening of diplomacy either. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was genuinely, not performatively, old, the expression of a man who has been wrong in large ways and is deciding whether he has the courage to be right in large ways. "I intend to try," he said. "Then we'll work together," Harry said. He walked out of the chamber and through the obstacles and up through the dark corridors of Hogwarts, and the castle moved around him with the particular quality it had had since the sorting, that sense of the vast, old thing being briefly aware of the particular thing walking through it. The stones themselves, the staircases, the portraits watching from their frames. He climbed back to Gryffindor Tower. Neville was waiting up, which he hadn't asked him to but which he'd somehow known would happen. "You okay?" Neville said. "Yeah," Harry said. "Voldemort's gone. Temporarily. Quirrell will need a healer." Neville stared at him. You just said that like you're telling me it rained." "I'm tired," Harry said honestly. "I'll be more dramatic about it in the morning." Neville looked at him for a moment. Then he said, with the simple, genuine warmth that was the most fundamental thing about him, "Ron and Hermione are going to be furious they weren't there." "I know," Harry said. He sat down in the armchair by the fire. "They can be furious in the morning too." The fire crackled. The common room was warm and quiet. Somewhere below in the castle, Dumbledore was beginning the work of managing consequences, and across England the network slept in the Yorkshire house and in 31 different households, and Dobby was, actually, Harry thought, looking at the fireplace, Dobby was probably already awake. Dobby seemed to have a sense for when Harry had done something significant, the way a very attentive parent had a sense, and was probably in the middle of being quietly informed through whatever channels Dobby used to be informed. Tomorrow there would be things to deal with. The school would know. Dumbledore would be managing the narrative. The stone would need to move. Quirrell needed care. Voldemort was temporarily displaced but not destroyed, and that was going to matter enormously in the months and years ahead. Tonight there was just the fire, and Neville falling asleep in the other armchair within 5 minutes, and the warm old stone of Hogwarts around them, and Harry Potter, 11 years old, who had just done what he'd been building toward for 5 years and felt, for the most part, like he'd simply done what needed doing and was ready for what came next. He watched the fire until he could sleep. Chapter 5. The vote. The letter from Lucius Malfoy arrived at Hogwarts on the 14th of December, addressed to the Board of Governors, and its contents were distributed through the school within 48 hours the way all school gossip distributed, imperfectly and comprehensively. Harry read the copy Hermione had obtained through means she described as perfectly legitimate library research access and that he was fairly certain involved a sixth-year Ravenclaw prefect and some kind of barter arrangement that Hermione had the good sense not to detail. The letter was a masterwork of insinuation, formally concerned, precisely worded, raising questions about the management of a situation involving an 11-year-old student and a dangerous magical artifact and the propriety of allowing that student to remain in an unsupervised capacity during the incident in question. It never said Dumbledore is unfit. It never said Harry Potter is a danger. It simply asked questions, in the particular way of a man who knew that the right questions asked to the right audience were more damaging than direct accusations. Harry read it twice and then put it down on the common room table and looked at the fire. "He's careful," Neville said. He'd read it over Harry's shoulder. "He's very good at this," Harry said. "He's been doing it for 20 years. He knows exactly how much pressure to apply and where." "What does he actually want?" Ron asked, from the armchair. He'd read it once and had the slightly frustrated expression of someone who preferred his conflict straightforward. "Right now?" "To establish that Hogwarts under Dumbledore is mismanaged," Harry said. "In the medium term, to position himself to influence who replaces Dumbledore if he can force a resignation or a board review. In the long term," he paused. "In the long term he's clearing the ground. He knows Voldemort is coming back. He wants the institution's positioned correctly when that happens." Hermione looked up from the letter. "He knows about the stone. He'll have heard that something happened. He won't know details. But he's smart enough to know that whatever happened was connected to Quirrell, and he knows what Quirrell was." Harry stood up. "He's not reacting to what happened in November. He's been building this for months. The letter's just the part we can see. So what do we do?" Ron asked. "Nothing right now," Harry said. "The move that matters isn't in the school. It's happening somewhere else." He looked at the fire for a moment and thought about Yorkshire, and Dobby, and what Dobby had said in September about the timing of when the network became visible. The network had 73 elves now, 31 still embedded in households, 42 free at the Yorkshire estate and several subsidiary locations Dobby had organized in the preceding months. 73 was a number that Dobby had told Harry, with great precision, was close to the threshold. The threshold for what, Dobby had explained, was not about the size of the movement. It was about the evidence. 73 house elves who could speak to specific, documented, legally actionable instances of illegal magical binding, physical abuse, estate mismanagement, and deliberate suppression of a sentient species' magical capacity. 73 witnesses with 73 distinct household histories, many of them involving families with names the wizarding world recognized. Enough to make the Wizengamot sit down and be quiet for long enough to actually listen. The problem, as Harry and Dobby had discussed extensively over the previous year, was the mechanism of delivery. You couldn't simply walk into the Wizengamot with a house elf and expect the institution to engage with what the elf said. The institution had been built, across centuries, on the specific premise that house elves were not persons in any legally relevant sense, and institutions did not dismantle their own premises voluntarily. You needed something else. You needed the premises to be publicly, visibly, undeniably challenged in a way that the institution could not quietly manage away. You needed a moment. Harry had been thinking about the shape of that moment for a year. He'd talked to Dobby about it, and to Amelia Bones, who had been quietly building her own documentation since their meeting in the Leaky Cauldron in July, and to Goldtooth at Gringotts, who had found 6 separate illegalities in the management of wizarding estates that had direct bearing on elf rights as a subsidiary legal question. And he'd talked, carefully and indirectly, to one other person. He had a meeting to get to. Hogsmeade weekend in December was cold enough to make every surface look like the inside of a freezer, and the village had done its best to compensate with excessive decoration, wreaths on every door, lights in every window, the smell of something mold coming from the direction of the 3 broomsticks. Harry walked through it with his collar up against the cold and Ron and Hermione on either side of him, and they stopped at Honeyduke's because Ron had objectives, and then Harry said he needed to nip into the post office and would meet them at the Three Broomsticks in an hour. He went to the post office. And then he went through the post office and out the back door into the alley behind it, which was where Dobby was waiting. Dobby had changed, Harry thought, looking at him in the grey December light. Not visibly, he still wore a combination of garments that suggested someone had given him a set of doll's clothing and he'd made peace with it, but in the quality of his presence. The compression that Harry had seen in him on that first day, the careful smallness of a being who had learned to make itself minimally offensive, was gone. Not replaced with largeness, exactly, Dobby was still Dobby, warm and specific and occasionally alarming, but replaced with a straightness. The absence of apology. "They're ready," Dobby said. "All of them. All who are coming. 38 of the 42 free elves. For our, Bimby's sister is unwell, and the 3 who came from the coastal estate in November are still." "That's fine," Harry said. 38 is enough. Dobby nodded. His enormous eyes were very level. "It will be loud," he said. "Once this is in motion, it will be very loud." "I know. Lucius Malfoy will move quickly," Dobby said. "He has been preparing for something like this, not this specifically, but a challenge to the old order. He has allies on the Wizengamot. He has the ear of the minister. Bones has the documentation," Harry said. "Goldtooth has the estate records. The evidence is already in the hands of people who know what to do with it, we just need the Wizengamot to have to respond to it publicly." Dobby looked at him steadily. "There is one more thing," he said. "Tell me." "Sirius Black," Dobby said. Harry went still. He'd known about Sirius Black since the first year of Dobby's visits. The network had been gathering information on him since year 2, when cross-referencing the Death Eater histories and the circumstance of Harry's parents' deaths had produced a series of questions about the trial that had never happened. Dobby had been careful, thorough, meticulous. He'd obtained documents that shouldn't exist and found gaps in records that should have been filled and traced the specific procedural failures of 1981 with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world and considered this particular injustice personally offensive. Peter Pettigrew was alive. Harry had known this for 2 years, and it sat in him the way a splinter sat, not incapacitating but constantly present. The rat in Ron's pocket was almost certainly Peter Pettigrew, and Harry had been watching it with a patience that was occasionally difficult to maintain, and the time for patience on that front was running out. "What about him?" Harry said. "Bones has enough," Dobby said. "She has had enough for 3 months. What she has been waiting for is a moment, the same moment we are waiting for. A public proceeding, a formal legal context. You cannot force a review of an improper imprisonment quietly. You need an open forum." Harry looked at him. "She's going to move at the same time." "She is going to move at the same time," Dobby confirmed. "If we do this in January, as planned, the Wizengamot session that responds to the Elf Declaration will also contain a petition for emergency review of Sirius Black's imprisonment." Harry breathed out slowly. The alley behind the post office smelled of cold stone and something from a bakery 2 doors down, and he stood in it and thought about a man who had been in Azkaban for 11 years for something he hadn't done and what that meant and what it cost and what it would mean to end it. "Is he?" Harry started. "Alive," Dobby said quietly. "Sane. Or, sane enough. Azkaban does damage. But Dobby has been told, by a source who has seen him, that he is holding." A pause. He thinks about Harry Potter. The network has it from a guard who is not unsympathetic that Black speaks of Harry Potter regularly. Something tightened in Harry's chest. He didn't say anything about it. He filed it where he filed things that needed to be felt fully later, when there was time, and looked at Dobby. "January," Harry said. "We do it in January." "January," Dobby agreed. "The 15th. The Wizengamot has a scheduled session. The session is public, required to be by the statutes. Bones has arranged for her petition to be on the agenda. Anne," he paused. Dobby will be there. Harry looked at him. You're going to address the Wisengamot. Dobby is going to address the Wisengamot, Dobby said, and his voice was entirely flat and entirely certain, the voice of someone who had decided something enormous and had already moved past the deciding into the doing. Dobby has written a declaration. Dobby has had it reviewed by Goldtooth and by a witch named Augusta Longbottom, Neville's gran, Harry said. Who is, it turns out, a significant political figure with strong opinions about legal process and a personal history with the Death Eater families that makes her motivated, Dobby said. She had some things to say about the elf rights question. Many of them were things Dobby had not expected from a witch of her background. She is formidable. Harry almost smiled. Neville would be delighted to know this. Harry Potter may tell Neville, Dobby said. After January 15th. Dobby, Harry said. Are you sure? The Wisengamot, they will not, Dobby knows what they will do, Dobby said. They will not want to hear it. They will try to have Dobby removed. They will argue that Dobby has no standing. They will say that a house elf cannot address a wizarding legal body. His enormous eyes held Harry's with complete steadiness. And Dobby will stand there and read the declaration and they will not be able to unhear it. And Bones will have her documentation and Goldtooth will have the estate records and Augusta Longbottom will stand up and say that she supports the petition and the Wisengamot will have to decide what it is made of. Harry looked at him for a long moment. The cold December air moved between them. Somewhere in the village, a bell rang the half-hour. Who else is standing up? Harry said. Several people, Dobby said. Not all of them expected. Dobby has been busy. I know you have, Harry said. He looked at Dobby with the clear, direct attention that had always been the primary thing he gave, the thing that Dobby had said once, very quietly, was the most valuable thing Harry had ever offered. I'll be there. Dobby's ears lifted. Harry Potter should not be, I'll be there, Harry said again. I'm not asking permission. Dobby looked at him. A long beat of the particular communication they developed over 5 years, the thing that didn't need words. Then he said, with the enormous, quiet dignity that had always been the most fundamental thing about him, then Dobby will be very glad of the company. January moved toward the 15th with a specific quality of momentum, the way things moved when a great many pieces had been set in motion by a great many hands and were now converging toward a single point. Harry went back to Hogwarts after Christmas, a Christmas spent at the Yorkshire estate for the first time, which had been significant in ways he was still processing, and watched the school resume its ordinary routines around him with the particular awareness of someone who knew the ordinary routines were going to be very disrupted very shortly. He told Hermione on the 10th. They were in the library, which was where most of his honest conversations with Hermione happened because the library was the place she was most comfortable and people who were comfortable were more able to hear difficult things. He told her about the network, about Dobby, about the Yorkshire estate and the declaration and the Wisengamot session on the 15th. He told her about Bones and Goldtooth and Augusta Longbottom. He told her about Sirius Black. Hermione listened to all of it without speaking, which was extraordinary, because Hermione almost never listened to anything for that long without intervening. When he finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "How long have you been doing this?" "The network?" 3 years, Harry said. "The legal preparation?" "About 8 months." "You've been carrying all of this, not alone," Harry said. "Dobby has been carrying most of it. I'm supplementary." She looked at him with the expression she got when she suspected he was being modest about something important. "Harry." "What?" "You're 11. I'm aware. I mean," she put down her quill. "I mean you've spent 3 years building a liberation movement, compiling legal documentation against one of the most powerful families in Britain, and having direct conversations with the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and a Gringotts official about estate management, and you're 11. "I started at 6, Harry said. "I've had time." Hermione stared at him. Then she did something he didn't expect, she reached across the table and put her hand over his for a moment, a brief, firm contact, and said, "What do you need?" He thought about it. "Tell Neville," he said. "He needs to know about his grandmother before the 15th. And I think he should be there. He has a right to be there." Hermione nodded. "Okay." She picked up her quill. "What else?" "Be prepared for the school to be very loud afterwards," Harry said. "Whatever happens on the 15th, it's going to come back here. Malfoy is going to react, and that means Draco is going to be dealing with something difficult, and I'd rather we were." He paused, thinking about the boy in the library and the slip of performance and the genuine question underneath it. Thoughtful about it, Hermione said. "Yeah." She wrote something in her margin. "I'll talk to Neville tonight." "And Harry," she looked at him squarely. "I want to be there too." "I know," Harry said. "I was going to ask." He told Ron on the 11th, in the dormitory, after the others were asleep. Ron took it differently, not Hermione's precise accounting of facts and implications but the rounder, more personal emotional response of someone who cared about things in a full-bodied way. He went through several reactions quickly, surprise, then anger on Harry's behalf about the bindings, then a focused interest in the serious black piece that suggested the idea of a wrongful imprisonment offended him in a way that was almost physically uncomfortable. "Pettigrew," Ron said. He'd gone very still. "Pettigrew is alive." "Almost certainly," Harry said. Ron looked at his hands. Then he looked at the cage on his bedside table, where Scabbers the rat was sleeping. The rat who had been in his family for 12 years and had originally belonged to his brother Percy and was, if Dobby's network was right, Peter Pettigrew, secret keeper and betrayer and the man whose choices had killed Harry's parents. "Ron," Harry said carefully. "I know," Ron said, still looking at the cage. His voice was very controlled. "I know what you're thinking and I know what needs to happen and he stopped. "Can I have until the 15th? "Yeah," Harry said. "Of course. I need a couple of days to," he stopped again. Ran his hand through his hair. Harry waited. "He's been in my family's house," Ron said quietly. "He's been Percy's pet. He's been in our house, around my mum and dad and Ginny, and we didn't know." He looked at Harry with wide, honest eyes. "Your parents died because of him. And I've been carrying him around in my pocket." "You didn't know," Harry said. "I know I didn't know." His jaw tightened. "That doesn't make it," he searched for the word. "Comfortable." "No," Harry said. "It doesn't." Ron looked at the cage for a long moment. Then he got up, moved the cage to the far end of the room, came back and sat down. "The 15th, he said. "We sorted on the 15th. "Yeah," Harry said. "We do." They left for London on the morning of January 15th, which required telling McGonagall that there was a family matter requiring Harry's immediate attention, which was technically true in the sense that Sirius Black was his family and his matter. McGonagall looked at Harry with those sharp eyes that saw more than she usually acknowledged seeing, and said, "I expect you back by dinner." "Yes, Professor," Harry said. "And I expect you to come back in one piece," she said, in a tone that was not asking. "That's the plan," Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that he hadn't expected from her. "I was at school with your parents." "Both of them?" "Your father was," she stopped herself. "You don't need my biographies right now. But I want you to know that I have been paying attention, Mr. Potter. To you, and to the things around you. And whatever is happening today," she held his gaze. "You are not alone in what you're working toward. Even from people who haven't said so." Harry looked at her. "Thank you, Professor." "Go," she said. "And be careful." They took the flue from Hogsmeade, 4 of them, Harry and Hermione and Neville and Ron, and came out into the Ministry of Magic atrium at 9:30 in the morning, which was full of the purposeful movement of people starting their working day. The atrium had a quality that official buildings had when they were genuinely old, a weight to the air, a feeling of accumulated decisions in the stone, the particular dignity of a place that had housed power for a long time and knew it. Harry had read the history. The Ministry of Magic had been operating in this building since 1707 and had been in the business of magical governance for considerably longer. It had handled the First Wizarding War and the trials that followed and the decade of nervous peace after that, and it had handled all of these things with the particular institutional quality of organizations that prioritize their own continuity above most other considerations. Today was going to be difficult for it. Amelia Bones was waiting near the fountain. She was in formal robes that were exactly as severe as her everyday clothing and carried a briefcase that projected an air of comprehensive documentation. She looked at Harry's group and then at Harry and said, "You brought children." "I brought people who have a stake in this," Harry said. She looked at Neville. "Longbottom. Your grandmother is already inside. She's been here since 8. Something that might have been amusement, briefly. She has already told the Chief Warlock his seating arrangement is suboptimal." Neville straightened his spine. "That sounds right," he said. "The elf?" Harry asked. "Already in position," Bones said. "Goldtooth is here. We have 12 supporting petitioners who have agreed to speak. The Wisengamot session opens at 10. She looked at Harry with the straight-line attention she gave everything. "Malfoy is here." "I expected him to be," Harry said. "He's with Fudge," she said. "He's been with Fudge since 7:30. Cornelius Fudge was the Minister for Magic, and Harry had read enough about him to have a reasonable picture, a man of moderate competence and significant anxiety who had spent his ministerial career making himself agreeable to the people who had the most power to make his life difficult. Lucius Malfoy had been making himself agreeable to Fudge for years. The relationship was not accidentally social. "Is Fudge going to try to block the session?" Hermione asked. "He's going to try to manage it," Bones said. "Block is too obvious. Fudge doesn't block things. He reshapes them, delays them, routes them into subcommittees. He's very good at it." She paused. "He will find today challenging." Harry nodded. "Let's go in." The Wisengamot chamber was round and tiered and had the specific quality of a room designed to make those at its center feel small. The seats rose in concentric semicircles, 50-odd members in plum-colored robes with the W on the chest, some of them already present, talking in the low-voiced way of people who knew something was coming and were managing their anticipation of it. In the central floor space, chairs had been set for the petitioners. In the gallery above, observers were already filling seats. Harry sat in the petitioners' chairs with Hermione, Neville, and Ron. He looked around the chamber with steady attention, cataloguing. Lucius Malfoy was in his Wisengamot seat near the top tier, technically a member, his money and family history buying him a position he'd held for 2 decades. He looked immaculate and composed, and his eyes found Harry's immediately. Harry met his gaze across the chamber. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. Fudge was in his ministerial chair, a round pink man in lime green robes who was currently conducting 3 separate quiet conversations at once and managing none of them with full attention. He had the specific energy of a person dealing with more information than they'd wanted and trying to organize it into a shape that felt manageable. Augusta Longbottom was in the gallery, upright as a flagpole, in full formal robes with the distinctive Longbottom plume in her hat that Harry had only ever read about. Neville spotted her and she gave him one brief, fierce nod. Goldtooth was at the side of the chamber in the space reserved for non-wizard parties, which was a narrow bench that had clearly been placed there as a minimal acknowledgement of the possibility that non-wizards might sometimes need to be present. He sat on it with the equanimity of someone who was used to being given the smallest seat in rooms and had long since decided that the size of the seat was not the measure of the person in it. And Dobby was in the gallery, standing against the back wall, very still. He was wearing the clothes that Harry had last seen him in, the combination of donated garments that Harry had helped assemble over the previous year, because free elves wore what they chose and Dobby had chosen carefully. He looked small against the stone wall and entirely unintimidated by it. Their eyes met across the chamber. Harry gave him a nod that meant ready, and Dobby's ears lifted and his nod meant yes. The chief warlock called the session to order at exactly 10 o'clock. He was an elderly wizard with the quality of someone who had been presiding over difficult sessions for 40 years and had developed a very thin patience for dramatics, which Harry thought might be useful or might be a problem depending on how the morning went. The first items on the agenda were procedural. Harry sat through them with the patience he'd developed for waiting, the same patience he'd used for 5 years in a cupboard and a bedroom and a school that didn't know what it had, the patience of someone who understood that the moment you were waiting for was worth the waiting. Then the chief warlock said, "We have before us a petition submitted by Director Bones of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, regarding matters of legal and magical rights." Fudge cleared his throat. If I may, he was already shaping his intervention, already organizing his delay. "The matters raised in the petition are complex and I wonder if the appropriate venue might be the petition is properly submitted and on the agenda," Bones said, standing. "The venue is correct." She looked at Fudge with the expression she gave things she'd decided to move past. "Thank you, Minister." Fudge sat back. He looked at Malfoy. Malfoy gave nothing. "The petition has 3 components," Bones said, opening her briefcase. "The first concerns documented illegal magical bindings placed on a minor. The second concerns irregularities in the management of the Potter estate. The third," she looked up at the chamber, "concerns the legal status of house elves under wizarding law." The chamber made a sound. Not one voice, the collective low movement of 50 people responding to something unexpected. "The third item," Bones continued, without varying her pace, "will be addressed by a witness whose testimony has been submitted as part of the petition. That witness has requested to address this body directly." "An elf cannot address," someone started, from the upper tiers. "The law specifies that witnesses in a properly submitted petition may address this chamber," Bones said. "The law does not specify the species of the witness. I would refer the member to Volume 12 of the Wisengamot Statutes, page 203. A pause. The kind of pause that happened when someone had done their homework completely and everyone else in the room was finding out about it. "The floor," said the chief warlock, with the tone of someone who had seen 3 decades of legal maneuvering and recognized when it had been done well, "is recognized." The gallery door opened. Dobby walked in. Harry had seen Dobby move through many spaces, and he'd always moved with the specific quality of someone who had adapted to the geometry of each room. But watching him walk into the Wisengamot chamber was different. Dobby walked into the Wisengamot chamber of the Ministry of Magic as if the space had been designed for him to walk into, as if the stone floor and the tiered seats and the ancient weight of the place were simply the location where what needed to happen was happening, and that was that. He walked to the center of the chamber. He stood. He looked at the 50 members of the Wisengamot, at Fudge, at Lucius Malfoy, at the chief warlock. He looked at them with enormous, level eyes. The chamber was entirely silent. "My name," Dobby said, in the reedy, clear voice that Harry knew so well, "is Dobby. I was, for 60 years, a house elf bound in service to the Malfoy family. I am now free. I am here to speak." "This is preposterous," someone said from the upper tiers. "A house elf cannot, the witness has the floor," said the chief warlock, sharply. Dobby reached into the garment he was wearing and removed a scroll. He unrolled it with the deliberate care of someone handling something that had taken a great deal of time to prepare, and when it was open he looked at it for one moment, and then he looked up at the chamber, and he began to read. He had been writing the declaration for 2 years. Harry had read every draft, there had been 11. The final version was 47 paragraphs, each one precise, each one evidenced, each one building on the previous one with the logical architecture of an argument that had been built to withstand challenges from every direction Dobby had been able to anticipate. It began with history. Not dry history, the real history of magical bonding and the specific ways that what had once been a contractual arrangement between species had been degraded, across centuries, into something categorically different. It named dates. It named laws. It named the specific Wisengamot Acts of 1675 and 1798 and 1847 that had progressively stripped the legal personhood from house elves in the service of making them more useful to wizarding households. It moved to personal testimony. 42 accounts, submitted as an appendix, from 42 free elves, each one a specific documented instance of illegal magical binding, physical harm, and deliberate suppression of magical capacity. Bimby's 50 years of blood restriction. Kremble's deliberate binding by a man who had known exactly what he was doing and had done it anyway. Old Set and Pippi and Marsh and Talo and 37 others whose names and histories Dobby read with the patience of someone who intended every name to be heard. It moved to legal argument. Gringotts' analysis, delivered by Goldtooth at Dobby's signal, of the specific ways that the existing law on elf bonding violated 3 separate foundational precepts of the Charter of Magical Rights, a document the Wisengamot had written themselves in 1689 and had largely forgotten about until Dobby had found it in the ministry's own archive. And then Dobby looked up from the scroll and said, in a voice that was entirely his own, without the formal language of the declaration, without performance or rhetoric, simply as himself, house elves is not property. House elves is persons. Dobby knows this because Dobby has lived it. Dobby knows this because 60 years of being told otherwise did not make it true. And Dobby is asking this body, today, to decide what it is made of. The chamber was silent. Lucius Malfoy stood up. He did it smoothly, without urgency, in the particular way of a man who was confident he was the most important person in the room and was about to demonstrate it. Chief Warlock, he said, with the measured authority of someone who had been doing this for 20 years, I respect the thoroughness of the submission. However, the fundamental premise, Mr. Malfoy, said the Chief Warlock, of the petition rests on a mischaracterization of the established, Mr. Malfoy, said the Chief Warlock again, with more weight. You are not recognized. A pause. Malfoy stood. Something moved behind the composed face. I am a member of this body, you are a member of this body who has received documentation today naming you in connection with 3 counts of illegal magical binding of a minor, Bones said, standing. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a sheaf of parchment. Which means you have a personal interest in the outcome of this session that requires you to recuse yourself from participation in it. That is Wisengamot Statute 44, subsection 9. I would again refer members to Volume 12. The chamber moved again. Not a small sound this time, a larger sound, layered, many people processing the same information simultaneously and arriving at different places. Malfoy's face stayed composed. His eyes did not stay entirely composed. They moved to Harry, in the petitioners' chairs below, and what was in them was not the cold assessment of Diagon Alley or the rapid recalculation of the bookshop. Something more considered than that. The look of a man understanding, fully and completely, that he has encountered something he failed to properly evaluate, and that the failure was his. Harry met his gaze. He didn't have anything in particular to express. He held it for a moment and then looked away, because Malfoy wasn't the most important thing in the room. The petition continues, said the Chief Warlock. Bones moved to the second item. The Potter estate documentation was dense and required Goldtooth's detailed annotation and 20 minutes of legal argument about the specific statutes governing magical guardianship and trust management, and the chamber listened with the particular quality of attention that people gave to things they found uncomfortable and couldn't look away from. The third item was Sirius Black. Bones presented the evidence with the same directness she brought to everything, the missing trial, the specific procedural violations, the confession that had been taken under duress without a Veritaserum protocol, the evidence of Peter Pettigrew's ongoing existence. She presented the affidavit from a member of the Auror office who had concerns about the original processing of the case and had agreed to submit a signed statement. And then she said, the petitioners also wished to submit physical evidence of Peter Pettigrew's existence. Ron stood up. He was holding the cage. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone doing something genuinely difficult, and then he set it on the central floor and opened it, and Scabbers the rat came out looking offended, as rats always looked offended when moved unexpectedly, and sniffed the stone floor. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron and nodded. Ron looked at the rat and said, very quietly, "I'm sorry this is how it is, but you should have turned yourself in 11 years ago." Then he drew the wand he'd been practicing with since September 1st and performed a reversal charm that he and Harry had practiced 20 times in the past week. The rat became a man. Peter Pettigrew was short and round and grey in the particular way of someone who had been something other than human for a long time and had the leftover quality of that about him. He materialized on the floor of the Wisengamot chamber and looked up at 50 members of the Wisengamot and the chief warlock and the minister for magic with the expression of someone who has just run out of options. The chamber erupted. The chief warlock was on his feet. Bones had her wand out. 3 aurors who had been stationed at the doors materialized at the center of the room with the speed of people who'd been briefed on the possibility but were still processing the actuality. Pettigrew lunged for the exit, got 3 feet, and stopped with the completeness of something that had run into an invisible wall, because Harry had stood up and put a containment on him with the ease of someone who'd been practicing intermediate binding spells since he was 8 and who did not intend to let this particular rat go anywhere. "He's right there," Harry said, pleasantly, to the nearest auror. "You might want to get some cuffs on him." The auror, who was staring at Harry with a quality of personal adjustment in their expression, managed to conjure restraints. Pettigrew went to his knees. He was crying, in the particular ugly way of people who are crying purely for tactical reasons, and saying things in a rapid stream that were partially coherent, and several members of the Wisengamot were on their feet and several more were arguing with the several who were on their feet, and Fudge was on his feet looking between Pettigrew and Bones and Malfoy with the expression of a man who was watching several things he'd been certain about become uncertain simultaneously. Harry sat back down. Hermione was watching everything with the focused intensity of someone memorizing it for future reference. Neville was very pale but also very upright, the upright of someone choosing to be upright because it mattered. Ron was looking at the space where Scabbers had been with an expression that was sad and angry and resolved all at once. In the gallery, Dobby was standing exactly where he'd been standing before all of this started, against the back wall, watching. His enormous eyes were very calm. Harry looked at him. Dobby looked at Harry. The same communication as always, the thing that didn't need words, that had been built across 5 years of cupboards and kitchens and Yorkshire estates and Hogsmeade alleys. This is it, Harry thought. Yes, said Dobby's eyes. This is it. The chief warlock was calling order. Order was coming, slowly, the way order always came into rooms that had just had their furniture rearranged without warning, with resistance and then with resignation and then with the gradual, grudging acceptance of new arrangements. Lucius Malfoy had not sat down. He was standing in his tier with his hands clasped before him and his face arranged into something that was not the expression Harry had ever seen on it before. Not anger and not calculation and not the smooth social performance of the bookshop. Something older than all of those. He was looking at the center of the chamber, at Pettigrew in restraints, at Bones with her documentation, at Dobby's scroll on the floor where it had been placed as part of the record, and he was looking at it with the expression of a man watching an architecture he had built across decades develop cracks in several load-bearing walls simultaneously. "The chief warlock," said the chief warlock, with an authority that had cut through much worse noise than this, "will have order." Order arrived. Into the order, Augusta Longbottom stood up in the gallery. She had the presence of someone who had fought one war already and was unimpressed by the prospect of another, and she said, in a voice that carried without effort through the entire chamber, "I rise in support of the petition in all 3 of its parts. As a member of the Wisengamot, a mother of an auror, and a witch who has watched this institution fail its own stated principles for 11 years, I would remind this body that we have a choice before us today about what kind of institution we intend to be." She sat down. Precise. Sufficient. The chamber considered this. Then, from the second tier, a witch Harry didn't recognize stood up and said she supported the petition. From the 4th tier, a wizard Harry did recognize, he'd read about him, a moderate who'd been quiet for years, stood up and said the same. Then two more. Then another. Not a majority. Not even close to a majority. But enough to make the thing undeniable, enough to make it part of the record, enough to make it something that the Waisengamat would have to respond to officially rather than letting it disappear into a subcommittee. The chief warlock called for a preliminary finding. The preliminary finding, after 40 minutes of argument that Harry listened to with complete attention, was that the petition had sufficient standing to require a full investigation into all three components. The investigation would be led by Bones. The findings would be presented to a full Waisengamat session within 90 days. It was not a victory. Not the full thing, not yet. But it was the door opening. It was the thing being undeniable now, on the record, in the minutes that would circulate and the news that would go out by evening and the conversations that would happen in wizarding households across Britain tonight and tomorrow and the day after. Dobby picked up his scroll from the floor, rolled it carefully, and put it back inside his garment. He looked at Harry across the chamber with the same enormous, level eyes. Harry gave him the smallest nod. Dobby's ears went very slightly up. Outside the chamber, in the corridor, the world was already moving. Harry could hear it, voices, quick footsteps, the specific quality of an institution that has just been told something it needs to process. He stood with his three friends and Bones came over and said, "The investigation will be thorough." "I know," Harry said. "Malfoy will countermove," she said. "I know that too." She looked at him with those direct eyes. "Black," she said. "The emergency review, it's on the record. It'll take time, but it's in motion." Something settled in Harry's chest. Not satisfaction, more like the specific quality of relief that came from a long-held tension beginning, slowly, to release. "How long?" "Weeks," she said. "Not months. The evidence is clean. Pettigrew is in custody." A pause. He broke in about 30 seconds. Under questioning he named Malfoy as one of three people who knew he was alive. Her voice stayed entirely professional. "That will add to the countermove options." "Good," Harry said. She left, and the corridor was full of people, and somewhere nearby someone was calling Harry's name with the excitement of a journalist who had just watched something unprecedented, and Hermione put her hand on his arm and said, very quietly, "I need you to know that what just happened in there was one of the most extraordinary things I have ever seen." "Dobby did most of it," Harry said. "Harry. I'm serious." "I know you're serious," she said. "But you've been working toward this since you were 6 years old and a house elf sat across a kitchen table from you and told you the truth. And you're 11 and you just," she stopped. Looked at him. "You just changed things." "Started changing things," Harry said. "It's not done." "No," she said. "But it started." Ron had his arm around Neville's shoulder and Neville looked like someone who had just watched his grandmother do exactly what grandmothers were supposed to do and was overwhelmed by the precision of it. "Your gran is terrifying," Ron was saying. "That was amazing. Is she always like that?" "Yes," Neville said, with the tone of someone for whom this fact had been simultaneously wonderful and exhausting his entire life. In the atrium, people were moving fast, the purposeful urgency of people with information to disseminate. The golden statues of the fountain were catching the light, and by evening the Daily Prophet would have something, and by tomorrow Britain would know. Harry stood in the ministry atrium on January 15, 11 years old, with his three friends and the scroll of a declaration that had just been read into the official record of the Waisengamat, and he thought about a kitchen floor and 45 chains and a 6-year-old who had said let's take them off like it was simply the obvious next thing. He found Dobby in the atrium near the visitor's entrance, standing by himself in the careful way of someone who was in a large space and had decided not to require anything from it. Harry walked over and stood next to him. "Well done," Harry said. Dobby did not shake, Dobby said. He sounded faintly surprised by this. "You never do," Harry said. Dobby was quiet for a moment. Around them the atrium moved with the noise and energy of the world recalibrating, and Dobby stood in it with his enormous eyes very clear and said, "It is not done." "No," Harry agreed. "Malfoy will move," Dobby said. "Yes. The 90 days will be hard," Harry said. "Yes. But the door's open now. You can't unopen a door." Dobby looked up at him. "Harry Potter will be careful." "When has that ever been the primary concern?" Harry said. "For Dobby," Dobby said simply, "it is always the primary concern." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he put his hand briefly on Dobby's shoulder, small and bony under his hand, real and present in there, and said, "I'll be careful. I promise." Dobby's ears went up. He straightened his garments with a small, precise motion. "Then Dobby has much to do," he said. "You always do," Harry said. "Yes," Dobby said. "Dobby is very busy." And for the first time in the Ministry of Magic atrium, in front of the moving statues and the purposeful crowds and the weight of an institution that had just been told something it couldn't unhear, Dobby smiled. Not the careful, qualified expression of someone managing their own hope. A real smile. Full and genuine and entirely his own. He popped out of existence. Harry stood in the atrium for a moment. Then he turned to find his friends, because there was a great deal more to do and the day was not over and Lucius Malfoy was somewhere in this building doing exactly what Harry expected him to be doing, and January was only halfway through. He straightened his spine and walked toward the entrance. Chapter 6, Free. The 90 days were, as promised, hard. Lucius Malfoy moved on day 2. His counter-petition hit the Wisengamot record before the ink on Bones' investigation order was dry, a formal challenge to the legal standing of elf testimony, a motion to declare the January session's proceedings irregular on the grounds that an unregistered magical entity had addressed the body without proper authorization, and a separate filing that questioned the chain of custody on every piece of documentation Bones had submitted. It was fast, professional work, and Harry read through all of it over breakfast on the 17th and thought, with a kind of clean respect that had nothing to do with liking the man, that Lucius Malfoy was genuinely very good at this. He was also, Harry noted, playing from behind for the first time, and people who were good at things from a position of strength were different animals when the position shifted. The counter-petition was aggressive in places where it should have been careful, and there were 2 arguments in it that Goldtooth flagged immediately as overreach, the kind of overreach that happened when someone was moving fast under pressure and prioritizing speed over precision. Bones sent Harry a note on the 18th that said simply, "He's trying to drown us in paper." "We won't drown." Harry sent back, "I know. Focus on the Black Review first. The elf petition has a longer timeline but Black can't wait." She sent back nothing, which meant she agreed. Sirius Black was released from Azkaban on February the 3rd. Harry knew it was happening because Bones had told him the day before that the emergency review had concluded and the finding was unambiguous: no trial, no conviction, insufficient evidence for continued detention, Peter Pettigrew alive and already providing detailed testimony that implicated Sirius Black in nothing and himself in everything. The paperwork was done. The Dementors, which answered to the Ministry, had been instructed to stand down. He didn't know exactly what it was going to feel like until Dobby appeared in the Gryffindor common room at 11 at night and said, very quietly, "He is out." Harry sat with that for a moment. Hermione and Neville were still up, they'd developed a habit of staying up together on significant nights, which this had always been going to be, and Ron was half asleep in the armchair but opened his eyes when Dobby appeared. "He's okay," Harry said. He is walking," Dobby said. "He is at St. Mungo's for observation. He is," a pause. "He is asking for Harry Potter." Something moved through Harry's chest that he didn't immediately try to name. He sat in the Gryffindor common room with the fire going low and his friends around him and felt, for the first time in 11 years of being entirely without the family he was supposed to have had, the specific quality of that absence beginning, carefully, to change shape. "Can you take me there?" he asked. "Dobby can," Dobby said. "But, Dobby." "Yes," Dobby said. "Dobby can take Harry Potter." St. Mungo's at midnight had the specific quality of hospitals at midnight everywhere, quieter than the day, not quite still, staffed by people who had chosen the night shift and had a particular relationship with the hours when most of the world was asleep. The healer on Sirius Black's floor was a witch named Torres who looked at Harry and Dobby arriving via elf apparition in the corridor outside the private ward with the measured unflappability of someone who had seen stranger things and had a policy of dealing with what was in front of her. "He's awake," Torres said. "He's been awake since they brought him in. He won't sleep." She looked at Harry. "You're the Potter boy." "Yes," Harry said. "He's been saying your name for 6 hours," she said. Not accusingly. Just as information. "I should warn you, he's thin, he's not entirely steady, and his effect is variable. Azkaban does things to people that take time to undo." "Don't be alarmed if he's not." "I won't be alarmed," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment and seemed to decide this was true, and led him down the corridor to a room at the end. The room was small and white and had the determined cleanliness of places that were trying to be the opposite of somewhere else. There was a bed, and a window that showed the dark London sky, and Sirius Black. He was sitting up in the bed, which seemed to have been a battle between him and the healers that he'd won on points. He was exactly as Harry had imagined and entirely different. He was thin in the way that years of insufficient food made thin, not weak-looking, exactly, but spare, worn down to essentials, with the particular quality of someone who had survived something by being very deliberate about what they kept and what they let go. His hair was long and tangled and he had the look of someone who had been handsome before Azkaban and still was, underneath the years. His eyes were the thing. They were grey and they were very sharp, and when Harry came through the door they went through about 6 things in rapid succession: recognition, disbelief, a raw and overwhelming something that he shut down fast, and then a quality of focus that suggested that whatever Azkaban had done to Sirius Black, it hadn't touched the fundamental mechanism of him. "You're tall," Sirius said. His voice was rough from disuse. "I'm 11, Harry said. "I'm not particularly tall." James was, at 11, he stopped. Looked at Harry with an attention that was doing several things at once. "You've got his face. And her eyes." Something moved across his expression. "Everyone says that to you, don't they?" "Yeah," Harry said. "Does it bother you that I look like him?" "No," Sirius said, immediately and directly. "It just," he shook his head. "Sit down. Please. You don't have to stand in the doorway." Harry sat in the chair next to the bed. He looked at Sirius Black, his father's best friend, his godfather, the person who should have been collecting him from the Dursleys 11 years ago and hadn't been there to do it, and Sirius Black looked back at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "I'm sorry," Sirius said. "You were in prison," Harry said. "For something you didn't do." "I know. But I'm still," he stopped himself. Started again, with the directness of someone who had spent 11 years alone with their own thoughts and had run out of patience for anything indirect. "I should have been there. I should have. I wasn't the secret keeper. I know that now matters, the law knows that now matters, but I left you with Petunia and I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry." "You didn't leave me anywhere," Harry said. "You were arrested." "Same night," Sirius said. "I went after Peter and Hagrid had already. I left you." His jaw was tight. "I keep coming back to that. In there, 11 years of coming back to that." Harry looked at him steadily. "It wasn't your choice," he said. "It was done to you. Both of us. It was done to both of us." He held Sirius's gaze. "I'm not angry at you for it. Maybe you should be." "Maybe," Harry said. "But I'm not. I've had a lot of time to think about what anger was actually useful for and what it wasn't, and being angry at you for getting framed for murder and locked up without trial doesn't fall into the useful category." Sirius stared at him. "You're 11, he said. "Everyone keeps saying that," Harry said. "Because it keeps being surprising," Sirius said. Something shifted in his expression, the raw overwhelming thing coming back, this time not being entirely shut down. They told me, the healer told me some of what happened. The Weisengamot. The elf petition. He stopped. Was that you? Mostly Dobby, Harry said. Dobby's been building the network for 3 years. I helped with some of the practical magic and some of the planning. Dobby, Sirius said. A house elf. A free elf, Harry said. The most capable person I know, in most of the ways that matter. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and it came out quietly, your father would have, James would have lost his mind over you. Not sad, exactly. Something more complicated. In the best possible way. He'd have been absolutely incapable of dealing with how impressive you are. Harry felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't known was tight. He looked at the window and the dark sky for a moment and then back at Sirius. Tell me about him sometime, he said. When you're feeling better. Not the heroic version. The real version. Sirius's expression did several things in quick succession. Then he said, rough and genuine, yeah. I will. A pause. He was a pain in the backside, honestly. He was brilliant and he knew it, and he thought rules were advisory for the first 5 years of school. He grew out of most of it. Your mum sorted him out. How long did that take? Years, Sirius said, with something that was the ghost of a grin, the first one, the first glimpse of the person who had existed before 11 years in Azkaban. She had infinite patience and zero tolerance, which is a specific combination. She'd tell him exactly once that he was being an idiot, and then she'd stop telling him and just wait for him to work it out, and he always did because he couldn't stand that she'd stop telling him. That sounds like a specific kind of strategy, Harry said. It worked, Sirius said. Worked on all of us, honestly. Your mum had a way of being right that made you want to be right too. His voice had changed, quieter, more distant, but warmer. The quality of someone remembering something good rather than something lost. She'd have liked you. She'd have liked who you've become. Harry said nothing. He sat with it. The Dursleys, Sirius said, after a moment. His voice went different. What did they? It's handled, Harry said. Not dismissively. Just with the particular finality he used for things that were in the past and categorized. I'm fine. I was small for a while but then I wasn't, and it's handled. Harry, I'm not minimizing it, Harry said directly. I know what they did and what was done to me through living there, and I have a full and accurate account of it. I'm telling you that I processed that account and it doesn't run my life and I'm fine. He held Sirius's gaze. What I need is for you to get better, and then we need to talk to lawyers about guardianship, and then I need a place that's actually mine. That's the order. Sirius looked at him for a long, long moment. The gray eyes were very clear. Lawyers, he said. Goldtooth at Gringotts has already started the paperwork. He needed your signature and a medical clearance. Harry reached into his pocket and put a card on the bedside table. When you're ready. I could be ready tomorrow, Sirius said. You could be ready when you've slept and eaten for 3 consecutive days, Harry said. I feel fine. You've been in Azkaban for 11 years, Harry said patiently. You don't know yet what you feel. Give it 3 days. Sirius stared at him. Then, entirely helplessly, he laughed, a real laugh, rough and surprised and genuine, the laugh of someone who hadn't laughed in a very long time and wasn't sure their face remembered how, and it was the most alive sound in the White Hospital room. 3 days, Sirius said. 3 days, Harry agreed. He stood up. Get some sleep. I'll come back. You'll come back, Sirius repeated, as if confirming something he needed confirmed. Yeah, Harry said. I'll come back. He meant it the way he meant the things he'd told Dobby 5 years ago on the kitchen floor at Privet Drive, with the simple, direct weight of someone who said what they meant and didn't say what they didn't mean, and had been consistent about it long enough that the people who knew him understood the difference. At the door he turned back. Sirius was looking at him with the gray eyes and the specific expression of someone who had been alone for 11 years and was discovering, gradually and with great care, that they weren't anymore. "Harry," Sirius said. "Yeah." "Thank you," Sirius said. "Don't thank me," Harry said. "That's Dobby's thing." He walked out into the corridor, and Dobby was waiting exactly where Harry had known Dobby would be waiting, and they went back to Hogwarts together through the cold February dark. March was the investigation findings. Bones presented to the Wisengamot on the 19th, and the chamber was packed in a way that Wisengamot sessions were not usually packed, observers in every gallery seat, reporters from the Daily Prophet and from 3 other publications that Harry noted with interest, including Spellbound, which was not a publication he'd heard of before and which Hermione told him had started 3 weeks ago and was publishing what it described as accountability journalism about wizarding institutions, and the founding of which was not unconnected to events in January. Harry sat in the gallery with Hermione and Neville and Ron and watched Bones dismantle Malfoy's counterpetition with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent 50 days specifically preparing for each of its arguments and had an answer for every one. The overreach that Goldtooth had flagged became, in Bones' presentation, a series of demonstrable errors that required the counterpetition to be set aside on technical grounds before the substantive arguments could even be considered. It was, Harry thought, watching her work, a thing of genuine craft. Not dramatic, nothing about Bones was dramatic, but precise in the way that precision was its own form of power, the kind that outlasted the more obvious kinds because it was right, and being right was permanent in a way that being loud wasn't. The investigation's findings on the Potter estate were straightforward. 3 unauthorized redirections, detailed and evidenced. A formal order for restitution that Harry had already told Goldtooth he wanted directed to a fund for freed elves and to St. Mungo's extended care ward, which Goldtooth had managed to do without ever quite revealing that this was Harry's instruction while also making it entirely legally binding. Dumbledore was in the gallery. He had not attempted to intervene in the proceedings, which Harry had noted and credited. He had, instead, submitted his own testimony to the investigation, a document that Harry had not been shown but that Bones had described to him as comprehensive, self-critical, and useful. Whatever it contained, Bones had incorporated it into the findings in a way that framed Dumbledore's actions as misguided rather than malicious, and Harry had agreed with this framing because it was accurate. He caught Dumbledore's eye once across the gallery. Dumbledore gave him a nod that was not the managed, warm authority nod of the headmaster. Something more direct. Harry nodded back. The elf petition findings were the most significant and the most contested. Bones had 68 affidavits, 9 independent legal analyses, and Goldtooth's full charter of magical rights presentation. She had Augusta Longbottom's formal endorsement and the backing of 7 Wisengamot members who had reviewed the materials and come to the session prepared to vote. The vote was not a majority. Harry had never expected it to be a majority. That would have required a political shift that took longer than 90 days, and he'd known that from the beginning. What the vote was 23 in favor of the petition's core finding, that the existing law on elf bonding required formal review by a specially constituted subcommittee with a mandate to recommend legislative revision within 12 months. 23 out of 52. Not a majority. But 23 on the record, formal, incontestable. 23 where in January there had been 7, and 7 where in December there had been none. The subcommittee was constituted. Bones was on it. Augusta Longbottom was on it. Goldtooth was appointed as a non-voting technical consultant. And Dobby, after a procedural argument that required 3 separate precedent citations and 1 absolutely blistering intervention from Augusta Longbottom on the meaning of the word representation, Dobby was recognized as the official spokesperson for the free elf community and granted the right to address the subcommittee at each of its sessions. Lucius Malfoy voted against. 19 members voted against. 10 abstained. Harry watched the vote come in and felt the shape of it, not victory, not yet, but the structure of a path toward victory that now existed in law and record and wouldn't disappear. You could not unvote 23. You could not unconstitute a subcommittee. You could not, once it was in the minutes of the Wisengamot of Great Britain, pretend that 23 of its own members had not formally endorsed the principle that the treatment of house elves required legal examination. The door was open. It would take time to walk through entirely. But it was open. Malfoy made his final move on the 28th of March. Not through the Wisengamot this time. Harry had been watching for the political approach and had expected it, and Lucius Malfoy was smart enough to know that Harry was watching for it. He moved instead through the Board of Governors, which he had 3 reliable allies on, and he filed a formal review of Dumbledore's fitness as headmaster, citing the Philosopher's Stone incident, the Quirrell situation, the circumstances of the November events, and, in language that was precisely worded enough to be technically accurate while being entirely misleading in its framing, questions about the appropriateness of Harry Potter's apparent unsupervised involvement in events both inside and outside Hogwarts. Harry read the filing on the 29th and thought, there it is. Not with alarm. With the specific recognition of someone who had been waiting for a thing to arrive and had it arrive more or less where they'd expected it. He went to see Dumbledore that evening. The headmaster's office had become familiar across the year, the humming instruments, Fawkes on his perch, the portraits doing their careful listening. Dumbledore was already aware of the filing, he'd received it that afternoon. He was seated at his desk with a quality of stillness that Harry now recognized as the stillness not of someone managing a performance but of someone genuinely thinking. "You've read it," Harry said. "I have," Dumbledore said. "It is," he paused. "Skillful." "It is," Harry agreed, sitting down. "The Quirrell framing is the weakest part. He can't make the case that you mismanaged the stone without acknowledging what the stone was doing in the school, which opens questions he doesn't want opened. The questions about you are more effective," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "Because they're partially true." Dumbledore looked at him. "You have been operating independently, I've been operating with full Claude Sonnet 4.